10 days before Thanksgiving, my daughter and her husband finalized their plan to throw me out of my own home. They were going to announce it at the dinner table, a public humiliation disguised as an act of mercy. They didn't know I had overheard everything, so I made a new plan. On Thanksgiving Day, my daughter called, her voice frantic, asking, "Where are you?" I just laughed and told her to look in the top drawer of my desk. What she found there didn't just ruin their dinner, it detonated their entire lives. Before I tell you what was in that drawer, let me know where in the world you're listening from in the comments below, and please like and subscribe if you believe that sometimes the quietest people can make the most noise. My name is Julian Coleman. I am 75 years old, and for 40 of those years I was a professor of history. My life has been a quiet conversation with the past, a study in the long, slow currents of cause and effect. I believed I understood the patterns of human behavior. I was wrong. The story begins, as so many tragedies do, with an act of simple fatherly kindness. It was November 17th, a crisp, cold Tuesday in Chicago, 10 days before Thanksgiving. The air smelled of wood smoke and the coming snow. My daughter Chloe called me in the morning, her voice a perfect blend of cheerful and stressed that is unique to the holiday season. "Daddy," she said, "I am absolutely drowning in preparations for the big day. Could you possibly come over and help me get the old serving platters down from the attic? Rick is swamped at work, and you know how he is with ladders." Rick, her husband, the ambitious real estate broker, was always swamped. I agreed, of course. The thought of being useful, of being a part of their holiday preparations, was a welcome one. Since my wife Vivian passed 2 years ago, the silence in my large house had become a constant companion, and the holidays were its loudest echo. I arrived at their modern minimalist house in a trendy up-and-coming neighborhood. It was a beautiful home, all clean lines and glass walls, a place that always felt more like a magazine layout than a place where people actually lived. The air inside was warm and smelled of cinnamon and cloves from a pot of simmering cider on the stove. It was a perfect curated illusion of cozy domestic bliss. Chloe greeted me with a quick, distracted hug. "Oh, Daddy, you're a lifesaver. The attic is this way. I've got 1,000 things to do. The caterer is calling. The florist is texting. You know how it is." She bustled off towards the kitchen, already tapping furiously on her phone, leaving me to my task. The attic was dusty and cold, but I found the boxes of old china and silver easily enough. They were heavy, and the steep, narrow attic stairs were a challenge for my old knees. I made 3 trips, stacking the boxes carefully in the upstairs hallway. On my last trip down, I paused on the landing, a small halfway point on the staircase, to catch my breath. And it was there, in that quiet, unnoticed space, that the world as I knew it came to an end. I paused on the landing, a small halfway point on the steep attic stairs, to catch my breath and let the dull ache in my knees subside. The box of old silver serving platters felt impossibly heavy in my arms. Below me, the house was alive with the cheerful, chaotic sounds of holiday preparation. I could hear the faint melody of a Christmas song playing from a speaker in the living room, and the rhythmic tap-tap-tap of Chloe's fingers on her phone as she presumably coordinated some aspect of the grand Thanksgiving dinner. It was a perfect Rockwellian picture of family and tradition, a beautiful, meticulously crafted lie. From the kitchen just below the staircase, I heard their voices, Rick and Chloe. They were speaking in low, confidential tones, the kind of hushed conversation you have when you think you are completely alone. At first it was just a murmur, the words indistinct, but then a single phrase from Rick cut through the air, sharp and clear. "Did you talk to the developer about the closing date?" I froze. My breath caught in my throat. Developer closing date. They weren't buying a new property. I would have known. My mind, the slow, methodical mind of a history professor, began to piece together the fragments. "He's firm on December 15th, Chloe replied, her voice a frustrating whisper. "He says he wants to get the demolition permits filed before the end of the year. It's aggressive, but the offer is too good to pass up." Demolition. My blood ran cold. I sank down onto the top step of the landing, placing the heavy box beside me, my body suddenly feeling weak and brittle as old paper. I was hidden from their view, a ghost in my own daughter's house, and I was listening to a conversation that was never meant for my ears. "Okay, so December 15th is the deadline," Rick said, his voice all business now. "That means we have to get everything in order at Thanksgiving. Everything." I know, Chloe said, a hint of impatience in her tone. "The plan is solid, Ricky. We just have to stick to it." Let's go over it one more time, he said. I don't want any surprises. The announcement happens after the turkey before the pie. The whole family will be there. Your aunts, your uncles, everyone. It's the perfect time, Chloe agreed. Everyone will be happy, a little sleepy from the food, a little tipsy from the wine. We'll stand up and I'll do the talking. I'll start by saying how much we all love Daddy, she said, and the sound of my own pet name being used as a tool in her deception was a physical blow. I'll talk about how he's been so lonely since Mom died, how the big old house is just too much for him to handle. Emphasize the forgetful part, Rick coached. Lay the groundwork. He's been misplacing his keys. He forgot to pay the water bill last month. We need them to see him as a sweet but slightly dotty old man who needs our help. I sat there on the stairs, my heart hammering against my ribs. They were talking about me. They were creating a fictional, diminished version of me to suit their own narrative. And then, Chloe continued, her voice warming as she got into the performance, I'll announce our wonderful surprise, that we found him a beautiful, secure professional care facility just outside the city. Golden Meadows. A place where he'll have friends his own age, where his meals will be cooked for him, where he won't have to worry about a thing. Golden Meadows. I knew the name. It was a notoriously cheap state-run assisted living facility on the far outskirts of the suburbs, the kind of place you see in grim television exposés. It was a place people were sent not to live, but to be forgotten. And while everyone is absorbing how wonderful and caring we are, Chloe said, a note of triumph in her voice, you'll explain the second part of the surprise, that to fund this wonderful new life for Daddy, we've arranged the sale of his house, that the upkeep was becoming a burden, and this is the most responsible way to secure his future. It's brilliant, Rick said, a low chuckle in his voice. Absolutely brilliant. You do it in front of the whole family, he can't make a scene. He'd be too embarrassed. Your Uncle Robert and Aunt May will be telling everyone what a wonderful, dutiful daughter you are. I felt the blood drain from my face. It wasn't just a plan, it was a public execution, a character assassination staged over turkey and cranberry sauce. They were going to strip me of my home, my autonomy, and my dignity, all in one fell swoop, and they were going to do it while basking in the applause of our own family for being such loving, caring children. But the final killing blow was yet to come. The only thing that worries me is the oak tree, Rick said, his voice taking on a practical, logistical tone. The developer's surveyor said it might complicate the demolition. Its root system is massive. It's going to add to the cost of clearing the lot. Oh, who cares about that stupid old tree, Chloe said, her voice a dismissive sigh. It's just a tree. It's probably diseased anyway. We're getting almost $1 million for the property, Ricky. $1 million. Mom would have wanted us to be happy. She would have wanted us to have this. And with those words, my heart, which had been hammering in my chest, seemed to stop altogether. The oak tree, the one Vivian and I had planted on the day Chloe was born. We had brought her home from the hospital, and with our tiny sleeping daughter watching from her bassinet on the lawn, we had planted that sapling as a symbol of our new family, of the life that would grow and flourish in that house. It was not just a tree. It was the living, breathing heart of our family's history. And my daughter, my own daughter, was willing to sell it for scrap without a second thought, using her dead mother's name as a justification for her own greed. The world seemed to narrow, the cheerful Christmas music fading into a dull, distant roar. The only thing I could hear was the sound of my own blood pounding in my ears. The man who had been sitting on the stairs, the shocked, heartbroken father, was gone. In his place was someone else. A history professor who had spent his life studying the cold, hard calculus of betrayal. A man who understood that actions have consequences, that empires fall, and that the most carefully laid plans can be undone by a single unforeseen variable. And I, Julian Coleman, had just become the unforeseen variable in theirs. I don't know how long I sat there, frozen on the landing. Eventually I heard their conversation shift to something trivial, to the brand of wine they should buy for the dinner. The crisis in their minds was over. The plan was set. With a slow, deliberate calm I did not know I possessed, I stood up. I picked up the heavy box of silver. My hands were perfectly steady. I walked down the rest of the stairs and into the hallway. I could see them in the kitchen, their heads bent together over Chloe's phone, laughing at something on the screen. They were so absorbed in their bright, shiny future that they never even noticed the ghost that was drifting past their door. I walked to the front of the house, stacked the boxes neatly by the door, and let myself out into the cold November air. I didn't say goodbye. There was nothing left to say. The drive home was a blur. The city of Chicago, with its magnificent towering architecture, its millions of lives, its rich and complicated history passed by my window, and I saw none of it. My world had shrunk to the size of a single cold and diamond-hard thought: they had a plan for Thanksgiving. And now so did I. I do not know how long I sat there frozen on that small landing, a ghost trapped between the dusty past in the attic and the bright poisoned future being planned in the kitchen below. It could have been minutes, or it could have been an eternity. The cheerful Christmas music that drifted up the stairs now sounded like a funeral dirge. Their laughter, the casual, happy sound of my daughter and her husband, felt like shards of glass in my ears. The historian in me, the part that has spent a lifetime studying the turning points of great conflicts, recognized this moment for what it was. It was a declaration of war. A war I did not ask for, a war I did not want, but a war that had been declared against me in my own family on the eve of a day meant for gratitude. And the first rule of any successful counteroffensive is to never ever let your enemy know that the battle has begun. With a slow, deliberate calm that I did not know I possessed, I forced my body to move. I reached for the heavy box of silver platters, the ones my wife Vivian had so cherished. The weight of it, which had made my knees ache just moments before, now felt insignificant compared to the cold, heavy secret I now carried in my chest. I stood up, my joints protesting, but my will was made of iron. I began to descend the rest of the stairs. Each step was a conscious, measured act of control. I could not make a sound. I could not let them know I was there. I was no longer a father in his daughter's home. I was an intelligence agent deep in enemy territory who had just intercepted the battle plans. As I reached the bottom of the staircase, I had to walk past the open doorway to the kitchen. I kept my eyes fixed straight ahead, but from the corner of my vision, I saw them. They were standing by the marble island, their heads bent together over Chloe's laptop, scrolling through what looked like real estate listings. They were smiling, laughing at something on the screen. They were so absorbed in their bright, shiny, treacherous future that they never even looked up. They never saw the ghost drifting past their door, carrying the forgotten relics of a past they were so eager to sell. I placed the boxes of silver and china neatly by the front door, just as she had asked. I put on my coat, my movements slow and methodical. I turned the doorknob with the care of a safecracker, easing the latch open without a sound. I slipped outside into the cold November air and pulled the door shut behind me, not letting it click, but holding the knob until the bolt was fully seated in its frame. Silence. I walked down the stone path to my car. I did not look back. I got in, started the engine, and pulled away from the curb as quietly as I had left the house. The drive home was a blur. The city of Chicago, with its magnificent towering architecture, its millions of lives, its rich and complicated history, passed by my window, and I saw none of it. My world had shrunk to the size of a single cold and diamond-hard thought. They had a plan for Thanksgiving, a neat, tidy, and cruel little plan. They had written me into their history as a sad, forgetful old man, a footnote in the story of their own glorious ascent. They thought the story was already written. They thought the outcome was certain. What they had forgotten, what my daughter, a child who had grown up in a house full of books, should have known, is that history is not just the story of what happened. It is the story of who gets to tell it. And I, Julian Coleman, was about to write a new chapter. When I finally stepped back into my own home, the silence that greeted me was not the empty, sterile silence of my daughter's house. It was a warm, living quiet filled with the ghosts of 40 years of a life well lived. The air smelled of old books, beeswax, and the faint, lingering scent of the lemon verbena soap my wife Vivian had always loved. The house wasn't just a structure, it was a conversation, and every object in it was a part of that dialogue. I walked past the living room, past the comfortable, slightly worn armchairs where Vivian and I had spent thousands of evenings reading and talking. I walked down the hallway, my hand brushing against the wall where we had marked Chloe's height each year with a small pencil line, a rising tide of a childhood that had somehow receded and left this stranger in its place. I ended up as I always did in my study. This room was the heart of the house, the repository of our shared history. Bookshelves groaned under the weight of a lifetime of learning. A map of the ancient world hung on one wall, its borders a testament to the rise and fall of empires. And on my desk, in a simple silver frame, was my favorite photograph of Vivian. She was in her late 20s, her hair pulled back, a smudge of paint on her cheek, and she was laughing a brilliant, uninhibited laugh that I could still hear as clearly as if she were in the room with me. The picture was taken on the day we had finished painting the nursery for Chloe 30 years ago. We were exhausted, covered in paint, and deliriously happy. I sank into my old leather desk chair, the familiar creak, a comforting sound in the deafening quiet of my own thoughts. I looked at Vivian's smiling face, and I let the memories come. I remembered when we first bought this land. It wasn't a house then. It was just a patch of dirt and stubborn weeds on the outskirts of a growing Chicago. We didn't have much money. I was a young adjunct professor and Vivian was a librarian. But we had a dream of a home that was truly ours, a place with a big backyard where our children could play. "We'll build it ourselves, Julian," she had said, her eyes shining with that fierce, beautiful light that always made me believe anything was possible. "Every board, every nail, it will be our story written in wood and stone." And so we did. For 2 years, we spent every evening, every weekend working on this house. I learned about plumbing and electrical work from library books. Vivian, my meticulous, organized librarian, became a master at drywall and tiling. Our friends thought we were crazy. But with every wall we framed, with every window we set, we were not just building a house, we were building a life. This house wasn't an asset to be flipped for a profit. It was a testament to a partnership, a physical manifestation of a shared love. My gaze drifted from the photograph to the window to the massive, sprawling branches of the old oak tree that dominated the backyard. And the memory that came next was so sharp, so clear, it felt like it had happened yesterday. It was the day we brought Chloe home from the hospital, a tiny, perfect 7-pound miracle wrapped in a soft yellow blanket. The day was warm and sunny. We had placed her bassinet in the shade on the back lawn, and while she slept, her tiny chest rising and falling with each breath, Vivian and I had planted a tree. It was a small, fragile sapling, no bigger than a twig. "This will be Chloe's tree," Vivian had whispered, her hands covered in soil as she gently firmed the earth around the young roots. "We'll watch them both grow side by side, strong and beautiful." And we did. Every year as we marked Chloe's height on the hallway wall, we would take a picture of her standing next to her oak tree. The pictures were a silent, beautiful history of her life. The small girl with scraped knees, the awkward teenager with braces, the young woman in her graduation gown. And always in the background, the tree grew with her, its branches reaching higher, its trunk growing thicker, a silent, leafy guardian of her childhood. "Who cares about that stupid old tree?" Chloe's voice, so full of casual, dismissive cruelty, echoed in the silence of my study. She wasn't just willing to sell the house. She was willing to tear down the living symbol of her own life, a life her mother and I had so lovingly cultivated, and she was going to do it for a down payment on a trendier, emptier existence. They weren't just trying to sell a piece of property. They were trying to demolish my history. They were trying to erase the memory of Vivian, to bulldoze the very foundation of my life, all for a quick and dirty profit. And they were going to do it in my own name, under the guise of love and concern. The pain in my chest, the raw, bleeding wound of their betrayal, began to cool, to harden, to crystallize into something else. It was the cold, clear, and absolute resolve of a man who had just been handed his mission. They saw me as a forgetful old man, a relic from a bygone era. They saw my love as a weakness. They saw my history as a commodity. They had made a grave historical miscalculation. They had forgotten that history is not a gentle, passive thing. It is a powerful, unforgiving force, and they had just declared war on a man who had spent his entire life studying its lessons. They wanted a Thanksgiving surprise. I would give them one. I would give them a lesson in cause and effect that they would never, ever forget. I sat in the deep, enveloping silence of my study, the world outside my window fading to an indistinct blur. The drive home had been a void, a stretch of time and space my mind refused to record. But here in this room, surrounded by the quiet, steadfast company of my books and the ghost of my wife, the full, crushing weight of what I had heard descended upon me. The pain was not a sharp, clean blow. It was a slow, grinding pressure, the feeling of a life's foundation cracking, splintering, and giving way beneath my feet. My daughter, my Chloe, The little girl who had learned to read on my lap in this very room, her small finger tracing the words in a history book. The young woman whose college essays I had helped edit, whose dreams I had encouraged, whose future I believed was as bright and limitless as the summer sky. That person, the daughter I had loved and cherished, was a fiction, a memory. The real Chloe was a stranger, a cold-eyed conspirator who could speak of erasing her father's life with the casual dismissive tone one might use to discuss renovating a kitchen. I looked at the photograph of Vivian on my desk, her laughter frozen in time. A wave of profound failure washed over me. I had failed her. I had failed to protect the beautiful, trusting child we had raised from the cynical, grasping woman she had become. I had failed to see the rot that had taken root in her soul. The father in me was drowning in a sea of grief and shame. He wanted to call her, to scream, to weep, to demand an explanation. He wanted to confront the monster she had become and ask her where she had put his little girl. But as the waves of pain crashed over me, something else stirred in the depths. A part of my mind, a part that had been honed by 40 years of academic discipline of reading and analyzing. The long, bloody, and treacherous history of humankind began to assert itself. It was a defense mechanism, a retreat from the unbearable pain of the personal to the cold, clear realm of the analytical. The historian in me took over. He looked at the situation not as a father but as a scholar examining a case study, and he began to see the patterns. This was not a new story. This was a tale as old as time. The ambitious younger generation, impatient for their inheritance, plotting to usurp the old fading patriarch. It was the story of King Lear. It was the story of 1,000 forgotten Roman emperors. It was the story of power, greed, and betrayal, a timeless human drama now being staged in a Chicago suburb with a supporting cast of aunts and uncles over a Thanksgiving turkey. I began to analyze their strategy. It was, I had to admit, a well-constructed plan. Their primary weapon was not legal or financial, it was narrative. They were launching a propaganda campaign. They were going to control the story, to define the terms of my defeat, before the battle had even begun. By painting me as a sweet but slightly dotty old man, they were preemptively invalidating any protest I might make. My anger would be dismissed as a symptom of senility. My arguments would be the ramblings of a confused old man. Their public announcement at the family dinner was a masterstroke of political theater, a public coup designed to consolidate their power and legitimize their actions in the eyes of the only court that mattered to them, the court of family opinion. And as I analyzed their strategy, I began to see its fatal flaw. The flaw that has brought down 1,000 kings and 100 empires' arrogance. They underestimated their opponent. They saw a 75-year-old history professor, a man of books and quiet contemplation, and they assumed he was weak. They saw a grieving widower, and they assumed he was broken. They had no idea that I had spent my entire adult life studying the art of the long game, the quiet, patient, and devastatingly effective strategies that win not just battles but wars. To react with emotion, to confront them with my anger and my pain, would be to fall directly into their trap. It would be to play the very part they had written for me. It would validate their narrative. It would confirm their victory. No. The response could not be emotional. It could not be a reaction at all. It had to be a plan, a counter-narrative. A quiet, meticulously researched, and historically sound counteroffensive. The pain in my chest had not disappeared, but it was no longer a paralyzing agony. It was being transmuted into something else. It was becoming a cold, clear, and steady source of fuel for my intellect. I looked at the picture of Vivian again. The sadness was still there, but now it was mingled with a new, powerful sense of purpose. I was not just fighting for a house. I was fighting for our history, for her memory, for the truth. I opened the top drawer of my desk and took out a fresh, unlined legal pad and my favorite fountain pen, the one Vivian had given me when my first book was published. The historian had finished his analysis. Now the strategist would begin his work. At the top of the clean white page, I wrote a single clear title, Operation Thanksgiving. The father in me was weeping for the daughter I had lost. But the historian was going to war. I sat there at my desk, the legal pad in front of me, still blank, the title, Operation Thanksgiving, a silent declaration of war, at the top of the page. The house was quiet. The ghosts were quiet. The storm of grief and rage inside me had passed, leaving behind a cold, hard clarity, A historian knows that the first step in any successful campaign is not a grand dramatic charge, but the quiet secret gathering of one's most trusted allies. And I had only one. I reached for the phone, my hand steady, my movements deliberate. I was no longer the grieving widower, the shocked and heartbroken father. I was a strategist, a man with a mission. I scrolled through my contacts past the name Chloe, her picture, a smiling, happy stranger from a life that no longer existed. My thumb stopped on a name that had been a constant in my life for almost 60 years. A name that was synonymous with integrity, loyalty, and a brilliant, ruthless, legal mind. I pressed the call button. It rang twice, and then his voice, a familiar, gravelly baritone that had not changed since we were boys, came on the line. "Julian, is that you? It's late. Everything all right?" "Charlie," I said, and my voice was not my own. It was a new voice, a voice stripped of all its previous warmth and weariness. It was the voice of a man made of iron. "I'm sorry to call so late, but something has happened. Something serious." There was a pause on the other end of the line, the sound of a television being muted, of a man giving his full and undivided attention. "What is it?" he asked, his tone shifting from friendly to focused. "Are you all right?" "I am fine," I said, "but I have a problem that requires your particular expertise. It's a matter of some delicacy, and it concerns my family." "I see," he said, the two words carrying a universe of understanding. "My office tomorrow at 9. "No," I said, looking at the blank legal pad, the first lines of my strategy already forming in my mind. "Not the office, my house, and not tomorrow, now, tonight." The silence that followed was not one of hesitation, but of a professional mind processing the urgency of the request. "I'll be there in 30 minutes, he said without another question. I hung up the phone. I did not move. I just sat there in the quiet of my study, the room where I had taught my daughter to love history, the room where I had graded 1,000 papers on the rise and fall of great powers. I had always been an observer of history, a chronicler of the battles of others. Now, for the first time in my 75 years, I was about to become a participant in my own. The first move on the board had been made. The war had begun. The morning after my meeting with Charlie was cold and gray, the Chicago sky a uniform, unforgiving sheet of slate. I sat in my study, a cup of black coffee steaming in my hands, and I prepared for the first move of my counteroffensive. My strategy as a historian was not one of a frontal assault. That was what they expected. An emotional confrontation, accusations, tears. That would have been a battle on their terms, a battle I would have lost, a battle that would have solidified their narrative of me as a confused, angry old man. No. My strategy was older, more patient. It was the strategy of the partisan, the resistance fighter. I would not attack their army head-on. I would blend into the landscape. I would become the loving, harmless, slightly dotty old father they already believed me to be. I would smile and I would agree, and I would lay a series of quiet, deadly traps along the path they were so confidently marching down. My first act of war was to be a phone call. It required a performance of a lifetime. I had to bury the cold, calculating strategist under layers of warm, fatherly affection. I had to make my voice sound not like a man planning a demolition, but like a man planning a holiday. I looked at the picture of Vivian on my desk, her laughing eyes a source of both pain and strength. I took a deep breath, centered myself, and dialed my daughter's number. She answered on the third ring, her voice a carefully constructed blend of caution and practiced cheerfulness. "Daddy, good morning. Is everything okay? You left so quickly yesterday, I was worried." She was testing the waters, trying to gauge my mood to see if I was suspicious. It was time for my performance to begin. "Oh, good morning, my dear," I said, my voice warm and full of a manufactured, slightly frail energy. "Everything is fine, just fine. You know these old knees of mine. They don't much care for attic stairs anymore. I was just worn out. I apologize for not saying a proper goodbye." "Oh, of course, Daddy, I understand," she said, and I could hear the relief in her voice, the subtle relaxation of her guard. The excuse was plausible. It fit the narrative of the aging father she was already telling herself. "You have to take care of yourself." Well, that's all in the past. I said, my voice brightening with a forced enthusiasm. I was just sitting here looking at the calendar, and I got so excited. Thanksgiving is just over a week away. It's going to be so wonderful having the whole family together again in this old house. It's what your mother always loved most. I used my wife's memory as a tool, a carefully chosen piece of emotional leverage. The thought was vile, but the necessity was absolute. They had weaponized their love for me. I would now weaponize mine for her. "Yes, Daddy," she said, her voice a little softer now. It will be great." "Great," I boomed, feigning a jovial spirit I did not feel. "My dear, it's going to be magnificent. And that's why I'm calling. I want this year to be extra special. A real celebration of family. A celebration of you and Rick. I want you to go out and buy the biggest, most beautiful free-range turkey you can find. None of those frozen ones. And get that expensive French wine your Uncle Robert likes so much, the one with the fancy label. Get several bottles, and the good cranberries, not the kind from a can." I let my demands, my generous, loving demands, pour out of me. I was not just offering to pay. I was insisting on a higher standard of luxury, a standard that would appeal directly to her materialistic sensibilities. There was a stunned silence on her end. "Daddy, that's very generous, but all of that will be incredibly expensive," she said, a hint of breathless excitement creeping into her voice. "Nonsense," I declared. "It's my pleasure. It's my house after all. Let me be the host in spirit at least. Consider it an early Christmas present to the whole family. My treat. I just want everyone to be happy." I was not just offering them bait. I was offering them a gourmet meal served on a silver platter. I was speaking their language. The language of status, of quality, of spending money as a demonstration of love. In fact, I continued delivering the final, irresistible hook. "Why don't you and Rick just handle everything? You have such wonderful modern taste. My ideas are all so old-fashioned. You two just plan the perfect Thanksgiving dinner. Get whatever you want. Don't worry about the cost, not for a single second. Just send me the bills when you're done. Or better yet, just tell me the total. It will be my gift to you." It was a blank check, a declaration of my own financial incompetence and my complete trusting faith in them. It was the most tempting lure a master fisherman could ever devise. And she took it. Oh, how she took it. "Daddy," she gasped, her voice now full of a genuine ecstatic joy. "Are you serious? That is the sweetest thing anyone has ever done. Oh, thank you. Thank you, Rick will be so thrilled. We'll make it the best Thanksgiving ever, I promise." "I know you will, my dear," I said, my voice soft and paternal. "I have complete faith in you." The lie was so profound, so absolute, it felt like a physical thing, a block of ice in my own chest. But my voice did not waver. "I have to run," she said, her mind already buzzing with plans, with budgets, with opportunities. "I have to call the butcher right now. Thank you again, Daddy. You're the best. I love you, Chloe." I said the 3 most difficult words I have ever spoken in my life. "I love you too," she chirped, and then she hung up. I slowly lowered the phone. The cheerful, loving mask fell away, leaving the face of the cold, grim strategist beneath. The silence of my study rushed back in. My first move was a success. The performance had been flawless. The enemy was completely disarmed, lulled into a state of happy, arrogant security by a lullaby of their own greed. They believed the loving, slightly senile old man was back. They believed they were in complete control. They had no idea that they were now marching happily and enthusiastically down a path that I and I alone had chosen for them. The war had begun not with a bang, but with a cheerful, deceptive, and utterly devastating phone call. I hung up the phone, the echo of my daughter's cheerful, mercenary voice still ringing in my ears. The performance was complete. The first volley in my quiet war had been fired disguised as a flag of unconditional surrender. I sat back in my desk chair, the leather creaking in the silence of the study, and I pictured the scene on the other end of the line. I did not need to be there to see it. I had given them the script, and I knew with the certainty of a historian predicting a well-documented outcome exactly how they would play their part. I saw Chloe standing in her cold, minimalist kitchen, her phone still in her hand, a look of stunned, joyous disbelief on her face. Rick would be watching her, his arms crossed, his expression a mask of impatient, predatory curiosity. "Well," he would ask, his voice sharp, "what did the old man want?" Chloe would look up from her phone, her eyes wide. "You're not going to believe this," she would say, a slow, incredulous smile spreading across her face. He wants to pay for Thanksgiving, for everything. He told me to get the biggest turkey, the best wine, he said. And I quote, "Don't worry about the cost, not for a single second." Rick, I knew, would be suspicious at first. His mind was a labyrinth of angles and double crosses. He would not be able to comprehend a simple act of generosity without looking for the trap. "Wait a minute," he would say, his eyes narrowing. Just like that, out of the blue. After he practically ran out of here yesterday without a word, it sounds too good to be true. It feels like a test, Chloe. This would be the crucial moment. The moment where a sliver of caution could have saved them. But I was counting on my daughter's arrogance, her complete and unshakable belief in her own ability to manage her father. "A test," she would laugh, a high, dismissive sound. "Daddy, don't be ridiculous. He's not a chess player, Rick. He's a sad old history professor who misses his wife. This is exactly what he does. It's how he's wired." She would begin to pace the kitchen, her movements now full of a renewed, confident energy as she explained her father's pathetic, predictable psychology to her husband. "Think about it," she would say. "He's getting sentimental in his old age. The holidays, the thought of the whole family together in the old house, it's making him soft. He feels guilty for being grumpy and leaving so quickly yesterday. He's overcompensating. He's trying to buy his way back into everyone's good graces." She would stop and look at Rick, her expression one of profound, pitying wisdom. "And didn't you hear him yesterday complaining about his old knees on the stairs? He knows he's slowing down. He's falling apart. Our plan is the right one, Rick. It's a mercy. He needs to be in a home. This," she would say, gesturing with her phone as if it were a piece of irrefutable evidence, "this just proves it. He's becoming senile and reckless with his money. It's a good thing we'll be there to manage things for him soon." And with that, any of Rick's lingering suspicions would evaporate, burned away by the bright, hot flame of his own greed. Her explanation was too perfect, too convenient. It was exactly what he wanted to believe. It confirmed his own biases about my weakness and their own intellectual superiority. A slow, predatory smile would spread across his face. "So the old man is finally losing it," he would say, a low chuckle in his voice, "just in time for the holidays." They would laugh then, a shared ugly laugh of pure condescending relief. It would be the laugh of two people who had just been confirmed in their own genius, who had just had their most cynical beliefs about the world validated. They were not just getting the house, the money. They were getting it with a clean conscience, convinced they were the heroes of the story, the dutiful children saving their foolish old father from himself. My performance had not just disarmed them, it had armed them with a new, more powerful sense of self-righteousness. And with that righteousness came a new, more ambitious level of greed. "Well," Rick would say, his mind already calculating the new opportunities, "if he's offering to pay, we shouldn't be modest. Let's give him the Thanksgiving he wants, the most special Thanksgiving ever." "I'm already making a list," Chloe would say, her thumbs flying across her phone screen. "That organic heritage turkey from the gourmet butcher downtown, the one that costs $300. And that case of French Bordeaux from the wine cellar, not just a few bottles. If he wants to impress Uncle Robert, let's really impress him. And the pies," Rick would add, "don't get them from the bakery. Let's have them catered by that fancy dessert chef from the city, the one all your friends were talking about, and the flowers for the centerpiece. And the appetizers, let's add a full raw bar, oysters, shrimp." I could see them standing in their cold, perfect kitchen, their faces alight with the thrill of the spending to come. They were like children on Christmas morning who had just been told that Santa Claus was real and that their credit limit was infinite. They saw my generosity not as a gift to be cherished, but as a resource to be plundered, a weakness to be exploited to its absolute limit. They were so busy celebrating their victory, so engrossed in counting the spoils of a war they thought they had already won, that they never once stopped to ask themselves the most important question. They never stopped to ask if the gift horse they were so eagerly riding was in fact a Trojan horse. They heard the voice of a loving, senile father. They had no idea they were actually listening to the calm, patient voice of a historian, a man who knew better than anyone that the greatest and most arrogant empires are always the ones that fall the hardest, and theirs was about to fall. The phone call was the opening move of a quiet, brutal chess game. In the days that followed, my every action, my every word was a carefully calculated move designed to reinforce the character I was playing, the loving, generous, and slightly befuddled old man who was cheerfully funding his own demise. My life became a split screen. On one side was the public performance for my daughter and her husband. On the other was the silent, methodical preparation for their downfall. The public performance was a series of small, seemingly innocent interactions. 2 days after my initial call, I phoned Chloe again. It was the afternoon. I knew she would be busy. "My dear," I said, my voice full of a manufactured warmth. "I was just sitting here making a list and a thought occurred to me. The turkey. You are getting the fresh organic one from that butcher downtown, not one of those frozen ones from the supermarket, right? Your mother always said you could taste the difference." I could hear the faint, patronizing smile in her voice. "Yes, Daddy," she said, her tone the one you might use with a slightly confused but well-meaning child. "The very expensive one. The one you said to get. I'm taking care of it." "Wonderful, wonderful," I said. "I just worry. My mind isn't as sharp as it used to be. Thank you for handling everything." "Of course, Daddy," she said. "Don't you worry about a thing." Every call was another layer of camouflage. I was not just acting. I was building a case, establishing a pattern of behavior. The dotty old man obsessed with minor traditional details. The loving father reassured by his capable daughter. It was the perfect role. A few days later, I sent her a text message. "Chloe, my dear, would you be a lamb and send me the final guest list? I'm trying to make a little seating chart for my own reference so I don't get confused. So many new faces this year, and I'd hate to forget anyone's name." In my mind's eye, I could see her showing the text to Rick, the two of them sharing a quiet, conspiratorial laugh. "See," she would say, "he's already worried about forgetting names. He's so lost. This is the right thing to do, Ricky. He needs us to take care of him." She sent the list back a few minutes later. I looked at the names. My brother Robert, my sister-in-law May, cousins and nephews I had known my entire life. It was not a list of guests, it was a list of witnesses. I needed to know exactly who would be in the room when the final verdict was delivered. My days were a performance of loving senility, but my nights were different. After the sun went down, the historian, the strategist would emerge. My nights were filled with quiet, encrypted phone calls with Charlie. They were filled with the signing of real binding legal documents. They were filled with the slow, somber work of packing up my own life. I began to empty my bookshelves, carefully wrapping each treasured volume in paper and placing it in a sturdy labeled box. History of the Roman Empire, the Civil War, biographies. These books were my real family, my real legacy, and I would not be leaving them behind. 4 days before Thanksgiving, I executed my next move. I had a case of extravagantly expensive French wine delivered to their house. The kind of wine that cost more per bottle than the groceries for a family for a week. As the delivery truck was pulling up to their curb, I called them. "Chloe, my dear," I said, my voice cheerful. "There's a little surprise arriving for you right about now. A pre-Thanksgiving gift I thought you and Rick should have the good stuff to celebrate with. No need to thank me. Just a little something to show my appreciation for all the hard work you're doing." Their reaction was, as I had predicted, one of pure, unadulterated joy. They saw it not as a gift, but as further proof of my capitulation of my reckless end-of-life spending. They were not just getting a house. They were getting a fully stocked wine cellar to go with it. It was a strategic investment. A historian knows that a complacent army is a vulnerable army. I was keeping them fat, happy, and completely off guard. Every bottle of that expensive wine was a silent toast to their own impending doom. The contrast between my days and my nights was a chasm. By day, I was the doting father asking about flower arrangements and pie recipes. By night, I was a quiet, methodical general moving my pieces into position on the board, preparing for a battle that my enemy did not even know had begun. They were so confident, so utterly secure in their own cleverness that they never once questioned my sudden, boundless generosity. Their greed was a form of blindness. They were so focused on the money that they could no longer see the man. And that was the fatal flaw I was counting on. That was the weakness that I, the loving, forgetful, and utterly underestimated old man, was about to exploit. The days following my phone call with Chloe were filled with a strange, deceptive calm. On the surface, my life continued its quiet, scholarly rhythm. I spent my mornings in the library, my afternoons in the garden. But beneath the surface, a silent, furious current of activity was pulling me toward Thanksgiving. My nights were now spent in a new kind of research, not into the fall of ancient civilizations, but into the intricate legalities of modern-day fraud with Charlie as my private tutor. The next move came from them exactly as I had predicted. It was a Thursday afternoon, 6 days before Thanksgiving. I was in my study, a first edition biography of Ulysses S. Grant open on my lap, when the phone rang. It was Rick. His voice when he spoke was a smooth, warm river of practiced sincerity. "Julian, my man, how are you doing today?" he asked, the forced familiarity setting my teeth on edge. "I am well, Rick. Thank you for asking," I said, my voice the perfect blend of professorial politeness and elderly frailty. "Listen," he said, "Chloe and I were just talking about you. We were so touched by your incredibly generous offer for Thanksgiving. It just means the world to us that you're so excited about it. It's going to be a really special day." "I am looking forward to it immensely," I said, the lie tasting like ash in my mouth. "Family is the most important thing." "Exactly," he boomed, seizing on the word. "And that's really why I'm calling. You know, with all that's on your plate, getting ready for the big day, and with the holidays coming up, Chloe and I were getting a little worried about you. That big house, all the upkeep, all the paperwork. My goodness, it can be a lot for one person to handle." Here it comes, I thought. The gentle, concerned approach. The classic opening move of a confidence man. First, you identify a problem the mark doesn't even know they have. "I work with documents and contracts all day long, Julian." He continued, his voice now a model of professional helpfulness. "It's what I do. And I'd be more than happy to come over one afternoon, buy you a coffee, and just help you get everything organized. You know, we could go through your files, put all your important papers, the deed to the house, your insurance policies, your will, all that stuff into a neat, easy-to-find binder, just so you have peace of mind, so you know where everything is." His voice was as smooth as polished marble and just as cold. Every word of concern was a carefully placed lie. He wasn't offering to help me find peace of mind. He was offering to help himself find the deed to my house. He was asking for the key to the vault, and he was doing it under the guise of being a caring, responsible son-in-law. It was a beautiful, despicable performance. It was time for my own performance to begin. I let a long pause hang on the line, a silence filled with a manufactured, elderly confusion. "Why, Rick?" I said finally, my voice sounding touched, a little emotional, a little frail. That's incredibly thoughtful of you. I didn't know you thought of me in that way." "Of course I do, Julian," he said, his voice dripping with sincerity. "Your family." "You're right," I said, letting out a heavy, weary sigh. "It is a lot to handle. Ever since Vivian passed, I must admit I haven't been as organized as I used to be. The papers are all in a bit of a jumble in my desk drawers. Tax documents mixed in with old letters. I wouldn't even know where to start looking for the deed, to be honest with you. I was painting a picture for him, the picture of the exact man he wanted me to be, confused, overwhelmed, and grateful for the help of a younger, sharper mind. I was confirming his own biases, validating his own contemptuous assessment of my abilities. "That's exactly why I'm offering to help," he said, his voice bright with the pleasure of a plan coming together. "It's no trouble at all. I'll bring some folders, a label maker. We'll have you sorted out in no time. It will be a weight off your mind. A historian knows that you never ever interrupt your enemy when he is in the middle of making a fatal mistake." Rick's mistake was his profound underestimation of me. He was so certain of his own cleverness, so convinced of my senility that he couldn't see the trap he was so eagerly walking into. He thought he was the predator closing in on his prey. He had no idea that the prey was simply a decoy, a painted wooden duck floating peacefully on the water, while the real hunter was hidden in the reeds, watching and waiting. "That would be a wonderful help, son," I said, using the word son as a deliberate, strategic piece of bait. "A real weight off my mind. I would be very grateful." "It's my pleasure," he said, the satisfaction in his voice now unmistakable. "How about Saturday afternoon? I can come by around 2. "Saturday would be perfect," I said. "I'll see you then." "Great. You won't regret this, Julian," he said. "I'm sure I won't," I replied. We hung up the phone. I placed the receiver back in its cradle and looked down at the open book in my lap. Ulysses S. Grant, a man who understood the art of the long, patient campaign. A man who understood that sometimes the most effective strategy is to let your enemy defeat himself through his own arrogance. Rick thought he was coming over on Saturday to find the deed to my house. He believed he was taking the next step in his brilliant secret plan. What he didn't know was that he was now an actor in my plan. He was a pawn, and I had just calmly and deliberately moved him exactly where I needed him to be on the board. The fish was not just nibbling at the bait, it was now asking for a formal invitation to jump right into the boat, and I would be more than happy to provide it. Saturday arrived as all Saturdays do, but this one felt different. It was a day marked on my secret internal calendar. It was the day of the next performance, the next move in my quiet patient campaign. At precisely 2 o'clock, my doorbell rang. I had spent the morning preparing my stage. My study, usually a place of scholarly order, was now in a state of carefully curated chaos. Piles of old, irrelevant papers sat on the corners of my desk. A drawer was left slightly ajar, revealing a jumble of envelopes and files. I was creating a problem that my son-in-law was so eager to solve. I opened the door, a warm, welcoming smile on my face. There stood Rick, a picture of confident, predatory helpfulness. He wasn't just carrying a folder, he had a slim, expensive leather briefcase. "Julian," he said, his voice booming with a false heartiness that was almost impressive. "Ready to get this ship in shape?" "Rick, my boy, come in," I said, playing my part. "It is so good of you to do this. Chloe is a lucky woman to have such a thoughtful husband." I led him into the study, fussing over him as I went. "Can I get you some coffee? I just baked some oatmeal cookies. Vivian's old recipe." "That sounds wonderful, Julian. Thank you," he said, setting his briefcase down on my desk with a proprietary thud. He opened it, revealing a surprisingly elaborate organizing kit. There were color-coded folders, a label maker, plastic sleeves. He was not here to help. He was here to conduct an audit, to take inventory of my life. I brought him the coffee and cookies, and then I stood helplessly in the middle of the room, wringing my hands slightly. "I must confess, Rick," I said, my voice tinged with a manufactured embarrassment. "I'm not even sure where to begin. Ever since Vivian passed, I haven't been as organized as I should be. She handled all of this, you see. The bills, the policies. She had a mind for details." "That's exactly what I'm here for," he said, his voice smooth and reassuring, the voice of a doctor speaking to a confused patient. "Don't you worry about a thing. We'll go through it all piece by piece. The most important thing is to locate the core documents, the deed to the house, your will, any power of attorney forms. We'll start there." "The deed," I said, rubbing my forehead. "Oh dear, the deed. Now where did I put that? I had it in a safe deposit box at the bank for years. But then I think I brought it home. It might be in one of these desk drawers." I pulled open the main drawer of my large oak desk, revealing the chaotic jumble of papers I had arranged that morning. There were old canceled checks from the 1990s, sentimental letters from Vivian, expired insurance policies, user manuals for appliances I no longer owned. It was a perfect portrait of a life in disorganized decline. Rick looked at the mess with a barely concealed smirk of satisfaction. This was exactly what he had expected. The confused old man drowning in the details of his own life, in desperate need of a sharp, modern mind like his to come and rescue him. No problem," he said, rolling up the sleeves of his expensive shirt. "Let's just dive in. We'll make a few piles. Keep and toss, and important." For the next hour, he played the part of the efficient, caring son-in-law. He sorted through my papers, his movements quick and confident. I played the part of the grateful, doddering old man sitting in my armchair, offering confused comments and nostalgic anecdotes about the meaningless papers he was handling. "Oh, look," I'd say as he pulled out an old car title. "That was my first Buick. Vivian loved that car." "That's great, Julian," he'd say, his voice patient but his eyes constantly scanning for more important documents. "We'll put that in the sentimental folder." He was looking for one thing, and one thing only. He was a shark, and he could smell blood in the water. Finally, I decided it was time to give him what he wanted. "Wait a minute," I said, a look of dawning realization on my face. "The safe. Of course. It might be in the old safe." I walked over to a small, unassuming safe hidden behind a row of history books on the bottom shelf. I fumbled with the combination, pretending to forget the numbers before finally swinging the heavy door open. Inside were a few more old, irrelevant documents and a large, important-looking manila envelope. "Ah," I said, my voice full of relief. "I think this is it." I handed him the envelope. His fingers practically twitched with eagerness as he took it from me. He opened the clasp and slid out the document inside. It was thick, multi-page, and covered in official-looking stamps and seals. It was a copy of the property's title insurance policy from when we had paid off the mortgage 15 years ago. It looked incredibly official. It had the property ID number, the legal description of the lot, our names. It had everything except the one thing that mattered: any actual legal power. It was for the purpose of selling a house completely and utterly worthless. I watched his face as he looked at it. He was a real estate broker, yes, but he was a salesman, not a lawyer. His expertise was in charm and persuasion, not in the fine print of title law. He saw a document that looked right, that felt right, and his own arrogance and greed filled in the blanks. He saw exactly what he wanted to see. "This is it," he said, a note of finality and triumph in his voice. He looked at me, a smug, satisfied smile on his face. "Perfect, Julian. This is the main one. Now we're in business." He took the worthless document and slipped it into a crisp, new, bright red folder. He pulled out his label maker and with a series of satisfying clicks printed a neat professional label: House, Deed of Title. He affixed it to the folder. The lie was now officially organized. I watched him with his label maker, so proud of the order he was creating. He thought he was organizing my life. He had no idea he was simply cataloging the evidence for his own future indictment. He spent another hour sorting through my other papers, finding an old, outdated copy of my will and an expired power of attorney form, both of which he placed in their own neatly labeled folders. By the end of the afternoon, he had a small, organized stack of completely useless documents. His briefcase was full. His mission was a success. "There," he said, closing his briefcase with a confident snap. "All done, see? Not so hard. Now everything is neat and tidy. I'll take these to my office, make some secure digital copies for you, and we'll put the originals in a fireproof box. You won't have to worry about a thing." "Oh, Rick," I said, my voice thick with a manufactured gratitude. "I don't know how to thank you. This is a great weight off my mind. A great weight." He walked to the door, a conquering hero. He paused and placed a patronizing hand on my shoulder. "Don't you worry about a thing, Julian," he said. "We'll take care of everything from here." I closed the door behind him and leaned against it, the cheerful, grateful smile vanishing from my face. I listened as his car started and drove away. He left my house convinced he had the keys to my kingdom. He was so sure of his victory, so blinded by his own cleverness. He had no idea he was just holding a fistful of worthless paper. I walked back to my study. I knelt down and pulled up the small, loose floorboard hidden under my desk, a secret place only Vivian and I had known about. I reached inside and pulled out the real certificate of title, the single original document that held the true ownership of my home. It felt cool and solid in my hand. The real key, the real power, had never for a single second left my possession. As Rick pulled his sleek black sedan away from my quiet, tree-lined street, the atmosphere inside the car was electric. I was not there, of course, but I had studied them my whole life. I knew their patterns, their tells, their vanities, and I could picture the scene as if I were a ghost in the back seat. The moment they turned the corner out of sight of my house, the respectful, concerned masks they had worn would have dropped, replaced by the raw, triumphant faces of two successful conspirators. Rick would have let out a whoop of pure, unadulterated joy, slapping the leather steering wheel with his open palm. "I cannot believe how easy that was." He would have crowed, a wide, predatory grin spreading across his face. He just handed it over, the deed, the will, everything, like a lamb to the slaughter. Chloe would be laughing, a high, breathless sound of pure relief and exhilaration. She would reach over and run her hand along his arm. "I told you, Ricky," she'd say, her voice dripping with smug satisfaction. "I told you I knew how to handle him. He's my father. He's putty in my hands. All you have to do is mention my mother and look a little sad, and he just melts." Rick would place the red folder, the one containing the worthless documents, on the center console with the reverence of a knight placing a holy relic on an altar. "This is it, babe," he'd say, tapping the neat professional label he had so proudly printed. "This is the key to our entire future. The developer will have everything he needs now. The old man won't even know what's happening until we're all sitting down for turkey." "Did you see his face when you were sorting his papers?" Chloe would ask, a note of cruel amusement in her voice. "He was so lost, so grateful. A great weight off my mind," he said. They would both laugh at my expense, the sound ugly and sharp in the confines of the luxury car. "The poor old thing," she'd continue, her voice a perfect imitation of pity. "He really does think we're helping him. It's almost sad." "It's not sad, it's necessary," Rick would say, his voice turning serious, justifying their actions to each other. "He's losing it, Chloe. We both know it. This is a mercy. We're securing his future and ours. It's a win-win. A win-win. That is how they saw it. They had constructed a narrative in which they were the heroes, the dutiful children making a difficult but necessary choice. Their greed was not greed. It was foresight. Their betrayal was not betrayal. It was an act of responsible estate planning. To our future, Chloe would say, leaning over to kiss him a quick celebratory kiss. To the Lake Norman house, and to the stupid old oak tree finally getting the chop. They would drive off into the afternoon, two beautiful, successful people bathed in the golden light of their own self-satisfaction. They were so confident, so utterly convinced of their own brilliance and my weakness, that they never once questioned the ease of their victory. A historian knows that the most devastating defeats are always preceded by the most arrogant moments of triumph, and their moment of triumph I knew would be glorious and beautifully, wonderfully short. The week after Rick's visit was the longest of my life. I had played my part, handed over the worthless documents, and now I was living inside a quiet, tense silence, a lonely actor waiting for the next scene to begin. The authentic original deed to my home was tucked away in a safe deposit box at a bank across town, a silent, powerful truth waiting for its moment to be revealed. On the Tuesday before Thanksgiving, just 2 days before the planned family gathering, I went to see Charlie. His office, high up in a skyscraper overlooking Millennium Park, was a sanctuary of order and quiet strength. The walls were lined with law books and historical biographies. The air smelled of old leather and polished wood. It was a room where facts mattered, where truth was a weapon. It was exactly where I needed to be. Charlie greeted me with a warm hug, but his eyes were full of a deep concern. "Julian," he said, leading me to the comfortable leather chairs by the window, "you look like you're carrying the weight of the world." "Only my small corner of it, Charlie," I said, sinking into the chair. "But yes, the weight is considerable." I didn't waste time with pleasantries. I had been carrying this secret alone for a week, and the burden was becoming unbearable. I told him everything. I recounted the conversation I had overheard on the stairs, my voice a low, steady monotone, a historian reciting a painful but necessary set of facts. I described their plan in detail, the public announcement at Thanksgiving, the humiliation, the lies about my senility, the cheap nursing home, and the sale of my house. I told him about my performance, my cheerful phone calls, my offers to pay for the dinner. And finally, I told him about Rick's visit, about his condescending offer to help, and about the worthless copies of the documents I had so gratefully placed in his hands. As I spoke, I watched my old friend's face transform. The initial concern was replaced by a look of stunned disbelief. The disbelief then curdled into a dark, rising flush of pure, righteous anger. He was a calm, measured man, but he had known Vivian since we were all in college. He had held Chloe in his arms when she was a baby. The betrayal I was describing was not an abstract legal problem for him. It was a deep, personal wound. When I finished, he was silent for a long time. He stood up and walked to the vast window, his back to me, and stared out at the cold, gray expanse of Lake Michigan. "The audacity," he whispered, his voice a low, dangerous growl. "The sheer, unmitigated gall." He turned to face me, and his eyes, usually so full of a wry, intelligent humor, were now as hard and cold as the winter sky. "That ungrateful, spoiled child, and that grifter she married, after everything you and Vivian did for her, after the sacrifices you both made, to try and erase you, to sell your home, Vivian's home. It's monstrous, Julian. It's a desecration." His anger was a strange comfort. It was a validation of my own pain, a confirmation that I was not overreacting, that the crime committed against me was as profound as I felt it to be. "I could have them disbarred, you know," he muttered, pacing in front of the window now. "Rick, a real estate broker has a fiduciary duty. What he's planning is a flagrant violation of every ethical code in the book." Then he stopped pacing. The lawyer, the strategist, was taking over. The raw anger was cooling, hardening into a sharp analytical focus. "Okay," he said, sitting down opposite me again. "Let's deconstruct this. They have a plan, but it's a stupid plan built on a foundation of arrogance. They cannot sell a house they do not own. The deed, the original certificate of title, is in your name, and your name only, correct?" "Correct," I said. "It's secure. And the documents you gave him were worthless copies of old tax assessments and insurance policies." "Correct," I said again. "So legally, they have nothing," he said, a grim smile touching his lips. They are holding a handful of useless paper, and they think it's a royal flush. We could simply wait for them to make their announcement at Thanksgiving, and then you could stand up, produce the real deed, and watch them humiliate themselves. It would be simple, clean. It's not enough, Charlie, I said, my voice quiet but firm. Humiliation is not the same as justice. They won't learn a thing. They will just see it as a failed plan, a temporary setback. They will find another way. I need them to understand the gravity of what they have done. I need them to face a real consequence. Charlie looked at me, a deep understanding in his eyes. So you don't just want to win the battle, Julian. You want to win the war. I want to end it, I said, permanently. All right, he said, leaning forward, his voice all business now. Let's not assume anything. You said Rick is a real estate broker. He's arrogant, but he's not a complete fool. He must know that a copy of a tax assessment isn't enough to finalize a sale. It's only enough to get the process started, to show a preliminary proof of ownership to a developer. He paused, his eyes narrowing. Let me make a call. I have a friend at the Cook County Recorder of Deeds office. Let's just see if your ambitious son-in-law has already tried to file any preliminary paperwork. Let's see how far down this criminal road he's already traveled. He picked up his phone and walked to the corner of his office, his back to me. I heard him speak in a low, quiet voice, giving my address, my name, my property identification number. I sat there listening to the muffled sounds of his conversation, a cold knot of dread tightening in my stomach. I knew what he was going to find, the casual confidence in Rick's voice when he had taken the documents from me. It was the confidence of a man who had already laid his plans. After a few minutes, Charlie hung up the phone. He stood there for a long time, his back still to me, staring out the window. When he finally turned around, his face was a mask of cold, hard fury. Julian, he said, his voice dangerously quiet. This is no longer just a malicious plan to steal your house. As of last Friday, it is now an active felony. What did he do? I asked, though I already knew the answer. He used the property information from the documents you gave him, Charlie explained, his voice precise and damning. And he forged your signature. It's on a preliminary sales agreement with a major commercial developer known for its predatory practices. He filed it with the county last Friday afternoon. He was trying to get the sale into the system to create a legal paper trail that he could then use to pressure you, or if his plan at Thanksgiving worked, use a forged power of attorney to finalize. The room was silent. The line had been crossed. This was no longer a story of family betrayal and ingratitude. It was now a story of felony forgery of a crime that could and would lead to a prison sentence. So, I said, my voice as calm and as cold as the winter lake outside, what happens now? Charlie walked back to his desk and sat down. The angry friend was gone. In his place was the sharpest lawyer in Chicago. Now, Julian, he said, a dangerous strategic light in his eyes. The rules of the game have changed. This is no longer a family dispute. This is a criminal matter, and we are going to handle it like one. Charlie listened, his face a mask of stone, as I recounted the conversation from the stairs. He didn't interrupt. He just let me pour out the entire ugly story, from the talk of the developer to the casual, brutal dismissal of the oak tree, Vivian's tree. When I was finished, a heavy silence filled the office, a silence so profound I could hear the faint ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner, a sound I hadn't noticed before. He stood up and walked to the vast window, his back to me, and stared out at the cold, gray expanse of Lake Michigan. For a full minute, he said nothing. The audacity, he finally whispered, his voice a low, dangerous growl. The sheer, unmitigated gall. He turned to face me, and his eyes, usually so full of a wry, intelligent humor, were now as hard and cold as the winter sky. That ungrateful, spoiled child, and that grifter she married, after everything you and Vivian did for her, to try and erase you, to sell your home, Vivian's home. It's monstrous, Julian. It's a desecration. His anger was a strange comfort, a validation of my own pain. But then the lawyer in him took over. The raw emotion cooled, hardening into a sharp analytical focus. Okay, he said, sitting down opposite me again. Let's deconstruct this. They have a plan, but it's a stupid plan Julian built on a foundation of pure arrogance. They cannot sell a house they do not own. The deed, the original certificate of title, is in your name and your name only, correct? Correct, I said. It's secure in a safe deposit box. So legally they're powerless, he said, a grim smile touching his lips. You could simply wait for them to make their announcement at Thanksgiving and then stand up, produce the real deed, and watch them humiliate themselves. It would be simple. Clean. It's not enough, Charlie, I said, my voice firm. Humiliation is not the same as justice. They won't learn a thing. They'll just see it as a failed plan, a temporary setback. They will find another way. I need them to understand the gravity of what they have done. I need them to face a real, unavoidable consequence. Charlie looked at me, a deep understanding in his eyes. So you don't just want to win the battle. You want to win the war. I want to end it, I said, permanently. All right, he said, leaning forward. Then he told me about the second part of my story about Rick's visit and my performance as the dotty old man. He listened intently as I described handing over the worthless copied documents. When I was finished, he didn't smile. He looked even more concerned. He's arrogant, Julian, but he's not a complete fool, Charlie said, thinking out loud. He's a real estate broker. He must know that a copy of a tax assessment isn't enough to finalize a sale. But it might be enough. It might be enough to get the process started, to show a preliminary proof of ownership to a developer, to get a preliminary agreement filed. A new colder dread began to creep into my heart. What are you saying, Charlie? I'm saying an arrogant man is an impatient man, he said, his eyes narrowing. He thinks he has you completely fooled. He thinks he has 10 days to finalize his plan. But what if he already made a move? What if he's already tried to use those worthless papers? He reached for his phone, his movements suddenly sharp and decisive. Let's not assume anything. Let me make a call. I have a good friend at the Cook County Recorder of Deeds office. Let's just see if your ambitious son-in-law has already tried to file any preliminary paperwork against your property. Let's see how far down this criminal road he's already traveled. He put the phone on speaker, a small act of inclusion that made my heart pound in my chest. I listened to the phone ring, each ring an eternity. Recorder's office, this is Susan, a cheerful voice answered. Susan, it's Charlie Evans, he said, his voice warm and friendly, betraying none of the tension in the room. How are you? Charlie, I'm great. To what do I owe the pleasure? You only call me when there's trouble. Just doing a little due diligence for a client, Charlie said smoothly. Worried about a potential fraudulent claim on his property. Could you do me a favor and run a quick check on a parcel? I can give you the PIN. I watched as Charlie read the long property identification number from a note on his desk, a number I knew by heart. There was a pause, the sound of typing in the background. Okay, I've got it, Susan said after a moment. Property on the north side owned by a Julian Coleman. Looks clean. Title is clear. No liens. She paused. Oh, wait a minute. That's interesting. The air in the room seemed to get thinner. What is it, Susan? Charlie asked, his voice still casual. There was a filing against it last week, she said. Last Friday afternoon. It's not a lien, it's a memorandum of contract, a preliminary sales agreement. Looks like your client is selling. Is that so? Charlie said, his voice dangerously neutral. Who's the buyer? Some corporation, Northside Redevelopment LLC. Looks like one of those big commercial developers. And who filed the document, Susan? Charlie asked, his voice now a quiet, deadly whisper. Let's see. The filing agent is listed as Rick Thompson. The name hung in the air, a final damning confirmation. He had done it. He had already made his move. Susan, Charlie said, his voice like silk, you would be doing me a massive personal favor if you could pull up the scan of that document and email me a copy of the signature page. Just the signature page. I'd be very grateful. For you, Charlie. No problem, she said. It'll be in your inbox in 5 minutes. We hung up the phone. Neither of us spoke. We just sat there in the heavy ticking silence of his office waiting. It was the longest 5 minutes of my life. Then a soft, almost imperceptible ping from his computer. The email had arrived. Charlie clicked his mouse a few times. He opened the PDF file. He stared at the screen for a long, silent moment, and then without a word he turned the large monitor so that I could see it. And there it was. A scanned image of a legal document. And at the bottom on the line marked seller was a name. My name. Julian Coleman. But it was not my signature. It was a clumsy, amateurish, and utterly damning forgery. Seeing my own name written in a stranger's hand on a legal document designed to steal my life's work, it was a violation of a different kind. It was no longer just about a house. It was about my identity, my name, my very existence. He had not just planned to betray me. He had already actively committed the crime. Charlie's professional calm finally completely shattered. He stood up, and the look on his face was one of pure, cold legal fury. "The gall," he said, his voice a low, shaking whisper, "the absolute criminal gall of this man. He didn't even wait. He took the worthless papers you gave him, forged your name, and filed it with the government, trying to create a cloud on your title to lock you into a sale you knew nothing about." He began to pace, no longer the concerned friend, but the prosecutor preparing for war. "This changes everything, Julian," he said, his voice sharp and decisive. "This is not a family dispute anymore. This is not a moral problem. This is a Class 1 felony in the state of Illinois. Forgery of a real estate deed. We are talking about serious, hard prison time." He stopped and looked at me, his eyes blazing. "This document," he said, pointing at the screen, "is his confession. He was so arrogant, so impatient, he signed his own indictment and filed it with the government. Our plan is no longer just a clever countermove to their social game. It is now a strategy to ensure that a criminal, a man who has forged your name and tried to steal your home, faces the full and unforgiving force of the law." I looked at the forged signature on the screen, the looping J, the shaky C. It was a pathetic imitation, a child's drawing of a signature, and it was the most liberating thing I had ever seen. The last lingering shred of fatherly doubt, of a desire to protect my daughter from the consequences of her choices, was burned away in the stark black and white reality of this crime. The line had been crossed. This was no longer just about saving my house. It was about seeing that justice was done. The forged signature glowed on the monitor, a stark black and white confession. The air in Charlie's office, which had been thick with a sense of violation, now became sharp and cold with a new dangerous clarity. The game had changed. This was no longer a sad story about family betrayal. This was now a criminal case. Charlie turned from the screen, and the face of the angry, sympathetic friend was gone. In its place was the face I had seen him wear in a courtroom 30 years ago, the face of a prosecutor who smelled blood in the water. "All right, Julian," he said, his voice a low, precise instrument. "The rules are different now. Your son-in-law is no longer just a greedy fool. He is a felon, and we are going to treat him like one." "What does that mean exactly?" I asked, my own voice steady. The image of the forgery had burned away the last of my fatherly hesitation. "It means our options have expanded," he said, beginning to pace in front of his desk, the strategist coming to life. "Option A is simple. We pick up the phone right now. I call the district attorney's office, email them a copy of this forged document, and by dinner time tonight, Rick Thompson will be in handcuffs. The plan to sell your house will be dead. It's clean, efficient, and by the book." I thought about it for a moment. The image of Rick being led away in handcuffs was a satisfying one, but it was incomplete. "And Chloe?" I asked. "She'll be questioned, certainly," Charlie said, "but they'll see her as a pawn, a devastated wife. Without proof she was in on the forgery, they might not charge her. She'll be humiliated, but she might walk away." "That's not enough," I said quietly. "He didn't do this in a vacuum. She was his co-pilot. They planned my humiliation together. The punishment must fit the crime. And the crime was not just forgery. It was a profound and public betrayal." Charlie stopped pacing and looked at me, a slow, grim smile spreading across his face. "So you don't want the simple option," he said. "You want the historian's option. You want to let them play out their little tragedy right up to the final act." "I want them to walk into the trap they set for me," I confirmed. "I want them to stand up at that Thanksgiving dinner full of pride and arrogance and make their announcement. I want the entire family to be there to witness not my humiliation but theirs." "I like it," Charlie said, a dangerous glint in his eye. "It's poetic, but it's risky. We need a plan, a counter-offensive, one that is not just theatrical but legally sound and absolutely devastating." He sat down at his desk and pulled out a fresh legal pad. "Okay," he said, the pen in his hand poised like a weapon. "Operation Thanksgiving Phase 2. Here's what we do." He began to outline the steps, his mind a beautiful, brutal machine of legal strategy. "First, we neutralize the asset. The house is the prize. We take the prize off the board. You are going to sell your house, Julian, and you are going to do it this week before Thanksgiving." I was stunned. "Sell the house? But not to the developer," he cut me off. "To someone you trust, a friend, a church, or even better, a young family who will actually love it. We do a quiet, off-market cash sale. I can draw up the paperwork in a single day. We will have it signed, notarized, and legally filed before they even carve the turkey. When they stand up to announce the sale of your house, they will be announcing the sale of a property that you no longer own. Their entire plan will be based on a fraudulent premise. I saw the brutal elegance of it immediately. It wasn't just a countermove. It was a complete demolition of their entire strategy. Second, he continued scribbling on the pad, we prime the legal trap. I will take this evidence of forgery, he said, tapping the monitor, and I will have a private off-the-record meeting with a senior prosecutor at the DA's office. I will lay out the entire case. The forgery, the plan to defraud you. I will explain that it is a sensitive family matter and that you have a plan to confront them and resolve it on Thanksgiving. I will ask them as a professional courtesy to hold off on making an arrest until after the holiday. This does two things. It puts them officially on notice, starting the legal clock, and it ensures that when the chaos erupts, the authorities will already be fully briefed and ready to act. They won't be responding to a messy family squabble. They will be executing a pre-planned arrest for a documented felony. My mind reeled at the sheer cold-blooded genius of it. He was building a cage around them, and they were still happily planning the party inside it. And third, he said, looking up at me, his expression now deadly serious, the payoff, the moment of revelation. While I handle the legal machinery, you will continue your performance as the loving Dottie father. You will help them plan the dinner. You will praise their taste. You will be the perfect, unsuspecting victim. And you will prepare for the moment after they make their grand announcement. You need to prepare what's in that drawer you mentioned in your teaser. The final personal delivery of the consequences. The drawer, I repeated, understanding dawning. Yes, Charlie confirmed. After the public humiliation, after the chaos begins, you will deliver the personal verdict. Proof that the house is sold. Proof that they are under criminal investigation. And a final symbolic gesture of their new reality. Something that tells them in no uncertain terms that the life they knew is over. We sat in silence for a moment, the entire devastating plan laid out between us. It was a masterpiece of legal and psychological warfare. It used their own arrogance, their own timeline, their own chosen stage as the instruments of their destruction. Can we do all this in 2 days? I asked, my voice a whisper. Charlie leaned back in his chair, a look of absolute, unshakable confidence on his face. Julian, he said, history teaches us that the greatest victories are won not by the largest army, but by the one with the best strategy. And our strategy is perfect. The morning after I saw the forgery, a new and terrible chapter began. The betrayal was no longer a secret sorrow, a private wound to be nursed in the quiet of my study. It was now a legal fact, a documented felony, a file number in a cold bureaucratic system. The battle had moved from my home to a new, more dangerous arena. And in this arena, Charlie was the general. I met him at his office early the next morning. The city was still waking up, a soft gray light filtering through the high windows of his office. He wasn't on the phone. He was at his large conference table, and spread out before him was a meticulously organized set of documents. It was our evidence. The scanned pages of the forgery, the worthless documents I had given Rick, printouts of property records, and a detailed timeline of events he had drafted during the night. It was a portrait of a crime assembled with the cold, dispassionate skill of a master prosecutor. Good morning, Julian, he said, his voice quiet, all business. He gestured to the documents. I've been wargaming this all night. Our position is unassailable. The evidence is clean, the timeline is clear, and the motive is pure, ugly greed. Now it's time to bring in the heavy artillery. He wasn't talking about a phone call. He was talking about a formal strategic approach to the law. He picked up a thick bound folder. It was a legal brief, a summary of the case he had prepared. I'm not going to call some junior assistant DA on a public line, he explained, anticipating my question. That's how mistakes are made. That's how things get lost in the shuffle. No. For a case this sensitive, this explosive, you go straight to the top. I'm calling Maria Flores. Maria Flores. I knew the name. She was the head of the Economic Crimes Division for the Cook County District Attorney's Office. A notoriously tough, politically ambitious prosecutor with a reputation for putting wealthy white-collar criminals behind bars. She was not a woman you wanted as an enemy. Maria and I go way back, Charlie said, a grim look on his face. We were on opposite sides of a big insider trading case a decade ago. It was a brutal fight. We've respected each other ever since. She will take my call. And she will listen. He picked up his private office phone and dialed a direct line. He put the call on speakerphone. Flores, a sharp, no-nonsense female voice answered. Maria, it's Charlie Evans. He said, his voice a smooth, professional purr. There was a pause, and then the voice on the other end warmed slightly. Charlie, you old dog. I haven't heard from you since you retired. I thought you were spending your days playing golf and complaining about the government. The government gives me plenty to complain about, Charlie said with a dry chuckle. But this isn't a social call. I have something for you, something that's going to be right in your wheelhouse. It's big, it's ugly, and it's a slam dunk. You've got my attention, she said, all business again. What is it? Felony forgery of a real estate deed. Charlie said, the words falling like stones into the quiet room. Tied to a larger scheme of elder fraud and attempted grand larceny. The victim is a personal friend of mine, a respected academic. The perpetrators are his daughter and her husband. There was another silence on the line, this one heavy with professional interest. A family affair, Flores said. Those are always the messiest. Do you have hard evidence, or is this just a he said, she said situation? I have a signed, notarized, and filed preliminary sales agreement with the victim's name forged on it, Charlie said calmly. I have the worthless documents that were used to perpetrate the fraud. I have a detailed timeline, and I have a victim who is willing to testify. As I said, Maria, it's a slam dunk. This case will make headlines. The kind of headlines that look very good on a DA's re-election campaign. He was not just presenting a case. He was selling it. He was appealing to her ambition, her professional pride. All right, Charlie, she said, her voice now sharp with focus. You've got a case. Send over the file. My team will review it, and we'll have a warrant for the son-in-law's arrest by the end of the day. This was the moment, the point of no return. But this was also where Charlie's true genius, his mastery of the long game, came into play. That's the thing, Maria, he said, his voice dropping, becoming confidential, conspiratorial. We can do that. And we will. But my client, the father, has a unique request. He's an old-fashioned man, a man of a certain theatrical sensibility. He has a plan to confront his daughter and her husband to get a full confession, and to do it in a way that serves a more personal form of justice. What are you talking about, Charlie? Flores asked, her voice laced with suspicion. This isn't a TV show. We don't do theatrical, we do arrests. I know that, Charlie said smoothly. But hear me out. The confrontation is planned for this Thursday, Thanksgiving dinner, in front of the entire family. The daughter and son-in-law are planning to publicly announce their benevolent plan to put the senile old man in a home and sell his house. My client, in turn, is planning to reveal that he knows everything, the forgery, the lies. He believes that in the ensuing chaos and their panic, they will confess to everything. A confession made in front of a dozen witnesses. A confession that will be, shall we say, very difficult to retract in court. He was framing my plan not as an act of revenge, but as a clever interrogation tactic, a way to secure an even stronger conviction for her. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. I could almost hear the gears turning in her head. She was weighing the risks against the potential reward. It's unorthodox, Charlie, she said finally, and it's messy. If he tips them off, they could destroy evidence. They could run. They have no idea he knows, Charlie countered. They believe he is a doddering old fool. They will be walking into a perfectly laid trap. And as for the evidence, he said, tapping the folder on his desk, I have a complete verified copy of every single document right here. I am sending it to you via secure courier as we speak. You will have the entire case in your hands this afternoon. All I am asking for is a 48-hour hold. Let my client have his confrontation. Let him get you that confession on a silver platter. And on Friday morning, your team can move in and make the arrests. It will be clean, it will be public, and your case will be absolutely unbreakable. Another long silence. She was considering it. The idea of a confession in front of a dozen family members was a prosecutor's dream. It was a human interest story that the media would devour. It was a conviction that was not just a legal victory, but a public spectacle. All right, Charlie, she said finally, her voice full of a grudging respect. You always were a son of a bitch. You get your 48 hours. You get your family drama. But if anything goes wrong, if they get spooked, if they so much as shred a single piece of paper, the deal is off and my team goes in loud and hard. Are we clear? Crystal clear, Maria, Charlie said, a note of pure triumphant satisfaction in his voice. Thank you. Don't thank me, she said, and I could almost hear the grim smile on her face. Just make sure it's a good show. She hung up. Charlie slowly placed the receiver back in its cradle. He leaned back in his chair, a look of profound, exhausted satisfaction on his face. The machine is running, he said quietly. The DA's office has the evidence. The investigation is officially, if secretly, underway. They will not make a move until Friday morning. I felt a chill run down my spine. This was real now. The full, awesome power of the state was now a silent partner in my plan. The gears of justice were turning slowly, inexorably towards my daughter and her husband. They have 48 hours of freedom left, Charlie said, looking at me, his expression now deadly serious. 48 hours to enjoy their last Thanksgiving. 48 hours until their entire world comes to an end. The legal trap was now set. The cage was built, the door was open, and the bait, a magnificent Thanksgiving turkey, was already on the table. And all that was left was for the unsuspecting targets to walk inside. The phone call to the district attorney's office was a single decisive move that set the legal gears in motion. But my plan, the historian's plan, required more than just legal maneuvering. It required a move on the ground. It required me to control the narrative, to control the very territory they were fighting for. The house. Charlie's advice had been clear. Neutralize the asset. Take the prize off the board before the battle even begins. Finding the right buyer was the most important part. I would not let this house, this living repository of my life with Vivian, fall into the hands of another predator or a soulless developer. Charlie, with his deep roots in the city, knew just the people. A young couple from our old church, David and Sarah. He was a high school music teacher. She was a nurse, just like Vivian had been. They had a baby on the way and were looking for a place to put down roots. A place with a backyard and good schools. They were a young couple with a modest savings, a couple who could never normally afford a house in my neighborhood. They came to see the house on the Saturday before Thanksgiving. I opened the door, and I was greeted not by the cool, appraising stare of a real estate broker, but by the warm, slightly nervous smiles of two people on the verge of a dream. David was tall and earnest. Sarah had a kind, open face and the unmistakable glow of an expectant mother. Professor Coleman, David said, shaking my hand firmly. It is an honor to meet you. Thank you so much for seeing us. The honor is all mine, I said, and I meant it. Please come in. Welcome to my home. I did not give them a real estate showing. I gave them a tour of a life. I walked them through the rooms, and with every step I told them a story. In the kitchen, I pointed to the small, worn spot on the floor in front of the sink. This is where Vivian stood, I said, my voice soft. For 40 years, she would stand right here looking out at the garden, and she would bake the most wonderful pecan pies for Thanksgiving. You can still smell the cinnamon in the wood if you try. Why? Sarah smiled a gentle, understanding smile and placed a hand on her own growing belly. In the hallway, I showed them the wall of pencil marks, the rising tide of Chloe's childhood. That's her first day of kindergarten, I said, pointing to a low mark. And that one way up there is the day she left for college. It all goes by so fast. They didn't see a wall that needed repainting. They saw a story, and their eyes were full of a quiet wonder. When we stepped into the backyard, they both gasped. The old oak tree, its massive branches now bare against the cold November sky, dominated the space. It was a magnificent, powerful presence. My goodness, Sarah breathed. It's like a cathedral. My wife and I planted that tree on the day our daughter was born, I told them. It was just a little sapling. We watched them both grow side by side year after year. David walked over to it and placed a hand on its rough, ancient bark. To have a history like this, he said, looking back at me, his face full of awe. It's a gift. He saw a gift. Rick, my son-in-law, had seen a liability, an obstacle that was lowering the property value. In that single, simple moment, I knew I had found the right people. They were not just buying a house. They were asking for stewardship of a history of a life. They were asking to continue a story, not to end it. It was everything my own daughter had rejected. We sat down at my old kitchen table, the same table where I had helped Chloe with her homework, the same table where Vivian and I had shared our morning coffee for 4 decades. Charlie was there with the paperwork which he had already prepared. "The offer is this," I said, my voice clear and steady. "The market value of this house is well over $1 million. The developer Rick was working with offered $950,000. I am offering to sell it to you for the amount you have in your savings, the amount you were pre-approved for your mortgage, $600,000. They stared at me speechless. David opened his mouth, then closed it again. "Professor Coleman, Julian," Sarah said, her voice trembling slightly. We can't accept that. That's too generous. It's not right." "It is perfectly right," I said, a firm, quiet authority in my voice. "This house was never an investment for me. It was a home. Its value cannot be measured in dollars, but in the life that is lived within its walls. My wife and I built a happy life here. All I ask is that you do the same, that you fill these rooms with laughter, that you raise your child under the branches of that old oak tree. That is the only price I am asking." Tears welled in Sarah's eyes. David just shook his head, a look of profound, overwhelming gratitude on his face. "There is one condition," Charlie cut in, his lawyer's voice, bringing a note of formal gravity to the room. "This must be a cash sale, and it must close quickly and quietly. We will sign the papers today. The sale will be legally recorded on Monday, and the official closing and transfer of keys will happen next Friday, the day after Thanksgiving." They looked at each other, a silent, joyous communication passing between them. "Yes," David said, his voice thick with emotion. "Of course. Whatever you need." And so we signed. At my kitchen table, with a simple blue pen, I signed away the deed to the house that held my entire life. I watched as David and Sarah added their own signatures, their hands slightly shaking, not with deceit, but with the profound, hopeful gravity of a dream coming true. It was a quiet, solemn, and deeply sincere transaction. It was the absolute antithesis of the ugly forged document that was sitting in a file in the district attorney's office. They left soon after, their faces alight with a joy so pure and overwhelming it was a beautiful thing to witness. They thanked me over and over again, promising to be good stewards, promising to honor the history of the house. I believed them. I stood at the front door and watched them walk down the path, their arms around each other, their heads bent together as they whispered about their future, about the nursery they would paint, about the life they would build. I closed the door and leaned against it. The house was quiet again. But it was a different kind of quiet. The house was no longer truly mine. I was a guest now, a caretaker for the last few days of my own history. I felt a pang of deep, profound loss, a grief for the walls and the floors and the memories. But underneath the grief, I felt an unshakable sense of peace. I had sacrificed my past, but I had secured its meaning. I had given away my home to save its soul. The house was sold. The prize was officially off the board. Now all that was left was to watch the thieves arrive to rob an empty vault. The days leading up to Thanksgiving were the strangest of my life. I was a man living a double existence. To the outside world and in my brief, cheerful phone calls with my daughter, I was the same Julian Coleman. I had always been, a quiet, retired professor, a doting father, excited for the upcoming holiday. But in the silence of my own home, I was a different man entirely. I was a strategist, a logistician, a ghost, quietly dismantling his own life. My work began at night. After the sun went down and the respectable, quiet houses on my street were settling into their evening routines, my own house would come alive with a secret, somber purpose. I began to pack. My study, the room that had been my sanctuary for 40 years, was the first to be deconstructed. I did not pack with the frantic energy of a man in a hurry. I packed with the meticulous care of a historian archiving a precious collection. Each book was a friend, a memory. I took them down from the shelves one by one, my fingers tracing the familiar spines. The Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire, A People's History of the United States, biographies of great generals and forgotten philosophers. I wrapped each one in soft paper and placed it gently into a sturdy box, labeling it in my neat academic script. These were not just objects. They were the tools of my trade, the collected wisdom of 1,000 lifetimes. They were the most valuable things I owned, and they were coming with me. I moved on to the photographs. There were dozens of them, a gallery of a life well lived. Vivian and I on our wedding day, young and impossibly hopeful. Chloe on her first bicycle, a look of fierce determination on her face. Our family vacations, our Christmases, our ordinary beautiful days. I packed them all a portable museum of a family that no longer existed. It was a painful, heartbreaking process. Each image was a fresh wound, a reminder of the innocent, happy past that my daughter was so willing to betray. But I did not weep. The time for tears was over. This was a time for methodical action. The boxes began to fill my garage, a silent, growing army waiting for a moving truck that no one knew was coming. I packed my clothes, my personal papers, the few pieces of Vivian's jewelry that I had kept. But I left the rest. I left the heavy furniture, the dishes in the kitchen cabinets, the rugs on the floors. I was shedding the skin of my old life, taking only the essential heart of it with me. The house, as I emptied it of its soul, began to feel less like a home and more like what my daughter and her husband already saw it as a stage set waiting for its final dramatic scene. On the Wednesday before Thanksgiving, the day before the great family gathering, I made my final preparations. The legal sale of the house to the young couple was complete, the document securely filed by Charlie. The district attorney's office was briefed, their own secret file open and waiting. All that was left was for me to prepare the final personal delivery of the consequences, the drawer. I cleared the top of my old oak desk in the study. I laid out the 3 items, the 3 components of my final lesson, and I prepared them with the care of a soldier cleaning his rifle before a battle. The first item was the sales contract. It was a thick, professionally bound document, the official notarized proof that my house, Vivian's house, had been sold. I held it in my hands, feeling its weight. It was not just paper, it was a declaration of independence. It was a statement that my life, my history, my legacy was not for sale to the highest bidder. It was mine to give, and I had given it to a family who would cherish it, not demolish it. I ran my finger over the signature line, where David and Sarah's hopeful, earnest signatures sat beside my own. This was a document of creation of a new beginning, and it would be the instrument that would nullify their own document of destruction. The second item was the one that caused a cold, heavy ache in my chest. Charlie had given it to me that morning. It was an official-looking document, a single page in a clear plastic sleeve. At the top, in stark block letters, were the words, Cook County District Attorney's Office, Felony Investigation Unit. Below it was a case number, and then the names of the subjects of the investigation, Thompson Rick and Coleman Chloe. And beneath their names, the charge, forgery Class 1 felony. Seeing my daughter's name, my Chloe's name, on a criminal document, it was a moment of profound, soul-crushing tragedy. This was not a game. This was not a clever family squabble. This was the document that would in all likelihood lead to her incarceration. This was the proof that the path she had chosen was not just one of greed, but one of criminality. My hand trembled as I held it. For a moment the father in me screamed in silent protest. But the historian, the man who believed in the unforgiving logic of cause and effect, knew this was a necessary, unavoidable truth. This was the consequence. The third and final item was a paradox. It was an act of cruelty, and it was the last desperate act of a father's love. It was a single, cheap-looking key, the kind you get from a hardware store. It was the key to a small one-bedroom apartment I had rented in a run-down but respectable neighborhood on the other side of the city. I had prepaid the first month's rent. It was clean, it was safe, and it was empty. Beside the key, I placed the short, simple note I had written. This is your new inheritance. Start building. It was not a gift of a new home. It was the gift of a harsh and unforgiving reality. It was the key to a life without my protection, without my money. A life where they would have to learn the value of $1, the dignity of a day's work, the simple, brutal truth of consequences. It was everything they had spent their lives avoiding. I took the 3 items, the contract, the criminal complaint, the key, and the note, and I placed them one by one into the top drawer of my desk, the sales contract on the bottom, the criminal complaint in the middle, and the key and the note on the very top. I closed the drawer. The sound of the old wood sliding shut was a quiet, solid, and final sound in the empty house. The trap was set. The lesson was prepared. The gift, my final terrible Thanksgiving gift, was ready for delivery. I stood there in my study, a room now filled with the ghosts of packed-away memories, and I felt a strange and profound calm. The historian had done his research. The strategist had laid his plans. The execution was now just a matter of time. Thanksgiving Day dawned cold and bright. A fresh blanket of snow had fallen overnight, covering the world in a pristine, beautiful silence. Inside my house, however, it was a world of warmth and bustling, happy chaos. The air was thick with the rich, nostalgic aromas of roasting turkey, simmering gravy, and the sweet scent of Vivian's pecan pie baking in the oven. For this one final day, I had allowed my house to be a home again. I was not just the host. I was the curator of a memory, the stage manager for a final heartbreaking performance. They all began to arrive in the early afternoon. My brother Robert and his wife May, my cousins, my nieces and nephews. They filled the house with their laughter, their stories, their loud, chaotic, and beautiful energy. They commented on how wonderful everything smelled, how festive the house looked. I had decorated it just as Vivian always had, with garlands of pine and bowls of winter fruit. It was a perfect, heartbreaking replica of a happy family gathering. Chloe and Rick arrived last, a king and queen making their grand entrance. Chloe was radiant in a stylish cashmere sweater dress, her arms full of expensive-looking hostess gifts. Rick was the picture of the successful, dutiful son-in-law, carrying in a case of the very wine I had sent them, as if it were his own generous contribution. They moved through the family with a practiced, easy charm, accepting compliments, hugging relatives, and playing their parts to perfection. "Julian, you've outdone yourself," my brother Robert boomed, clapping me on the back. "The house looks wonderful." "Oh, it wasn't me," I said, my voice full of a gentle paternal pride. I smiled and gestured towards my daughter. "It was all Chloe and Rick. They've handled everything. My brilliant modern daughter and her wonderful husband. I just provided the house." Chloe beamed at the praise, a perfect picture of loving, humble duty. "Oh, Daddy, don't be silly," she said, coming over to give me a hug. Her hug was cool and brief, an actress hitting her mark. "We were happy to help. We just want you to be able to relax and enjoy the day." "We're a team," Rick added, placing a proprietary hand on my shoulder. "That's what family is for." The hypocrisy was so profound, so audacious, it was almost beautiful. They stood there basking in the family's admiration, accepting praise for their love and devotion, all while knowing that their true plan for the day was to strip me of my home and my dignity. I, in turn, played my own part, with a quiet, serene perfection. I was the patriarch, the benevolent, slightly frail old man happy to cede control to the younger, more capable generation. I was full of praise for their efforts. "Chloe, my dear, this turkey is a masterpiece," I announced at the dinner table. "You must have spent a fortune." "Rick, my boy, this wine is exquisite. You have such excellent taste." With every compliment, I could see their confidence growing, their self-satisfaction solidifying. They exchanged small, triumphant glances across the dinner table. Their plan was working perfectly. The entire family was a witness to their loving care, their dutiful concern. They were building an army of allies, and I was their most enthusiastic recruiting agent. The dinner was a long, slow, and beautifully orchestrated piece of theater. The conversation flowed around the long dining table, a river of family stories, old jokes, and good-natured arguments about politics and football. I sat at the head of the table, a quiet, smiling observer, a ghost at my own Last Supper. I listened to the laughter. I watched my family, the people I had known and loved my entire life, and I felt a profound, aching sadness. They were all unwitting actors in my play, the supporting cast in a tragedy they did not understand. As I looked at their faces, I saw the true genius of Chloe and Rick's plan. They were using the very best of our family traditions, love, trust, a desire for harmony as a weapon. To stand up and fight them in this setting would have been unthinkable. I would have been the one to shatter the peace, to ruin the holiday. I would have been the villain. Their strategy was brilliant. But mine, I knew, was better. Mine was not based on a single dramatic confrontation. It was based on a quiet, irrefutable truth, a truth that was at that very moment waiting patiently in the top drawer of my desk. After the main course, as the plates were being cleared and the pies were being brought out, I watched as Chloe caught Rick's eye across the table. He gave her a small, almost imperceptible nod. The time had come. This was the moment they had been planning, for the moment their public coup would begin. They were so full of their own cleverness, so certain of their victory. They looked at me sitting at the head of my table in my own home, surrounded by my own family, and they saw a relic, a faded portrait from a bygone era, a man whose time was over. They saw a quiet, gentle history professor. They had no idea they were actually sitting at a table with a man who had spent a lifetime studying the cold, brutal, and unforgiving lessons of war. And the first lesson of any war is to never, ever underestimate your enemy. They were about to learn that lesson, the hard way. The rich, heavy contentment of a successful Thanksgiving dinner had settled over the dining room. The remnants of the magnificent feast, the carcass of the expensive turkey, the half-empty bottles of fine French wine, the remnants of a dozen side dishes, were a testament to a day of abundance and shared family history. The air was warm, thick with the scent of pine from the fireplace and the sweet, nostalgic aroma of pumpkin pie. Laughter echoed around the long table as my brother Robert told one of his rambling, familiar stories. My family was happy, content, and completely oblivious. They were a captive audience, and the producers of the evening's main event were about to take the stage. I watched as Chloe, seated near the middle of the table, caught Rick's eye. He gave her a small, almost imperceptible nod, a silent signal that it was time. She had been waiting for this moment all day, and her anticipation was a palpable, vibrating energy beneath her calm, smiling facade. She had played her part perfectly, the dutiful daughter, the gracious hostess, and now it was time for her final triumphant scene. She stood up, a vision of youthful grace in her elegant cashmere dress. She picked up her wineglass and tapped it gently with the silver spoon. The sound, a clear, high-pitched chime, cut through the warm chatter of the room. One by one, the conversations faded. All eyes turned to her. "If I could have everyone's attention just for a moment," she began, her voice a perfect instrument of warmth and sincerity. She had the rapt attention of the entire family. My aunts and uncles, my cousins, they all looked at her with expressions of fond familial pride. They saw a successful young woman, the beloved daughter of their brother and brother-in-law, about to make a toast. They had no idea they were about to be made accomplices in a quiet, brutal act of patricide. "First," she said, her smile sweeping across the table, "I just want to say how wonderful it is to have all of us here together in this house. This house has always been the heart of our family, and being here today, all of us feels like the most perfect Thanksgiving we've had in a long, long time." She paused, letting the sentimental words land. My brother Robert nodded in agreement. "Hear, hear," he said, raising his glass. "And of course," Chloe continued, her voice taking on a softer, more emotional tone, "none of this would be possible without the heart of this house himself, my father." She turned her brilliant, practiced smile on me. I felt the weight of 20 pairs of eyes turning to look at me, their faces full of affection. I smiled back, a gentle, paternal, and utterly false smile. "Daddy, thank you for everything, for this house, for this family, for being the most wonderful father a girl could ever ask for." The room was now bathed in a warm, syrupy glow of family sentiment. She was a master of her craft. She was not just making a speech. She was weaving a spell, creating an emotional atmosphere where her next move would seem not just reasonable, but an act of profound, selfless love. "We all know," she continued, her voice dropping slightly, becoming more confidential, more serious, "that the last few years have been difficult for Dad. Since we lost Mom." Her voice caught a perfect theatrical crack of emotion. She paused, taking a moment to compose herself. My sister-in-law May reached out and squeezed her hand in a gesture of comfort. "Since we lost Mom, this big, beautiful house, it's become a lot to handle for one person. It's been a source of worry for Rick and me. We worry about him being here all alone." I watched a silent academic observer at my own dissection. I saw her laying the groundwork just as Rick had instructed. She was planting the seeds of my supposed incompetence, my loneliness, my decline. She was building the case for her own benevolent intervention. "He's been so strong," she went on, looking at me with an expression of pure, fraudulent adoration. "But we've noticed the little things, the misplaced keys, the unpaid bills, the quiet moments when he seems so lost. It's a heavy burden for him maintaining this house, a place so full of memories, a place that is perhaps too full of ghosts." The narrative was now fully formed. I was no longer a capable, independent man. I was a tragic figure, a lonely old widower haunted by the past, crumbling under the weight of his own life. The family was listening, their faces now a mixture of sadness and concern. They were buying her story completely. They were nodding in sympathy. They were ready for the solution she was about to offer. "And so," she said, her voice brightening, shifting from a tone of sad concern to one of exciting, hopeful news. "Rick and I have been working on a surprise for him. A way to honor his past, but also to secure him a vibrant, worry-free future. We wanted to give him a gift, a Thanksgiving gift that would truly allow him to enjoy his golden years in the comfort and security he so richly deserves." She paused, a masterful piece of theatrical timing, letting the anticipation build. The family was on the edge of their seats, their faces full of a happy, curious expectation. They were ready to applaud her generosity, to celebrate her filial devotion. She took a deep breath, ready to deliver the final killing blow, the announcement of the nursing home, the sale of the house, the grand final solution to the problem of her father. "Rick and I," she began, a triumphant, benevolent smile on her face, "have decided that it's time for Dad to have a new beginning, and so we have made an announcement, a very special announcement about Dad's future." And it was at that exact, perfect, and beautifully timed moment that my phone, which I had placed on the table beside my plate, began to ring. She paused, her triumphant smile beaming her chest, swelling with the self-congratulatory pride of a benevolent queen about to bestow a great gift upon her kingdom. "Rick and I," she began, her voice full of a false ringing sincerity, "have decided that it's time for Dad to have a new beginning. And so we have an announcement, a very special announcement about Dad's future." And at that exact, perfect, and beautifully timed moment, my phone, which I had placed face up on the dining table beside my plate, began to ring. The sound was not loud, just a simple classic telephone ring I had chosen for its clarity. But in the captivated, sentimental silence of the room, it was as loud and as jarring as a fire alarm. Every head at the table turned first to the phone and then to me. I saw a flash of pure, undisguised fury in my daughter's eyes. I had broken her spell. I had interrupted her monologue. I did not look flustered. I did not apologize. I simply looked at the screen, at the name David, the name of the young man who was the new rightful owner of this home. Then I looked up at Chloe and I gave her a small, calm, and utterly unapologetic smile. "Oh, do forgive me, my dear," I said, my voice quiet but carrying across the suddenly silent room. "I'm so sorry to interrupt your lovely speech, but I really must take this. It's important." The act itself was a declaration. To calmly, deliberately interrupt her at the very peak of her performance was an assertion of power she had not anticipated. She was frozen, her mouth slightly agape, the rest of her triumphant announcement dying on her lips. I picked up the phone and swiped to answer. "David, my boy," I said, my voice full of a genuine paternal warmth that had been absent from my conversations all week. "How are you? A very happy Thanksgiving to you and Sarah." I paused, listening, nodding my head. The entire family was watching me, their faces a mixture of confusion and curiosity. They were trying to understand this new, unexpected scene that had just been inserted into the evening's play. "Yes, we're just finishing up a wonderful dinner," I continued, my eyes scanning the faces of my family before they came to rest once again on my daughter. "Oh, that's fantastic news. You got the keys from Charlie this afternoon." "Excellent. I'm so glad. I was hoping you would." "Keys." I saw the word register on Chloe's face. A small, almost imperceptible frown line appeared between her eyebrows. Rick, standing beside her, had a look of pure, baffled confusion. "Yes," I went on, my voice still cheerful and light. "Everything is packed and ready to go. The movers are scheduled for 9 a.m. sharp tomorrow morning. The house will be completely empty for you by the afternoon. Yes, of course. I'll leave the garage door opener and the spare keys on the kitchen counter for you. Movers empty tomorrow." The murmurs around the table began a low, confused buzzing. My brother Robert was looking at his wife May with a raised eyebrow. My cousins were whispering to each other. The narrative was slipping from Chloe's grasp. "You and Sarah are going to be so happy here," I said, my voice now taking on a softer, more nostalgic tone. "It's a good house, a strong house. It has a happy soul. Just take good care of the old oak tree for me, will you?" It was very important to my wife. I listened for another moment, then ended the call. "All right, I'll let you get back to your family. Talk to you tomorrow. Goodbye, son." I placed the phone back down on the table. The silence that followed was a different kind. It was no longer the captivated silence of an audience. It was the dead, shocked, and utter silence of a room where a bomb has just been detonated and no one has yet begun to scream. I looked around the table at the sea of confused, questioning faces. My family. They were good people and they deserved the truth. And then I turned my calm, gentle, and now utterly terrifying gaze onto my daughter and son-in-law. Chloe was staring at me, her face pale, her triumphant smile now a frozen, grotesque mask of disbelief. Rick looked as if he had been struck by lightning. The gears in his quick, clever mind were turning, trying to process a set of facts that simply did not compute. Keys, movers, new owners. It was impossible. He had the deed, he had the plan. I did not raise my voice, I did not need to. I was a history professor and it was time for a final, simple and irrefutable lecture. I do apologize for that interruption, I said to the table at large, my voice as calm and as measured as if I were beginning a seminar on the Peloponnesian War. As I was saying, that was David, a lovely young man, a music teacher. His wife Sarah is a nurse. They're expecting their first child in the spring. I paused and then delivered the quiet, killing blow. They are the new owners of this house. The sale was finalized on Monday. They are moving in tomorrow. The drive away from my old life was quiet. Charlie had met me a block away just as we had planned. I had gotten into his car, leaving my own parked in a neighbor's garage, and we had driven in a comfortable, somber silence to my new home. It was a small, clean, and utterly anonymous apartment on the other side of the city. A place with no history, no memories, a blank page. The walls were bare, the rooms were empty, save for a single chair, a small table, and the boxes containing the curated relics of my past. It was from this quiet, empty space that I would deliver the final killing blow. I knew she would call. Her humiliation would demand it. Her rage would require a target. I sat in the single chair, the leather briefcase containing my own travel documents at my feet, and I waited. It didn't take long. 30 minutes after I had walked out of my old life, my phone began to vibrate, the screen illuminating with her name, Chloe. I let it ring. Once, twice, 3 times. I wanted her panic to build. I wanted her to feel, just for a moment, the terror of being out of control. On the 4th ring, I answered, my voice calm, pleasant, and utterly serene. "Hello, Chloe," I said. The sound that came through the phone was not a voice. It was a raw, unfiltered shriek of pure, hysterical rage. "Where are you?" she screamed, the sound so distorted with fury it was barely human. "What did you do? What was that? What new owners? You've ruined everything. The entire family is staring at us. You have humiliated me." I held the phone slightly away from my ear, listening to the tirade with the detached interest of a scholar studying a particularly noisy specimen. There was no remorse in her voice, no concern for me, no question about my well-being. There was only the white-hot narcissistic rage of a thwarted monarch, a queen whose coronation had been unexpectedly, catastrophically interrupted. "Hello, Chloe," I said again, my voice still perfectly calm. "Happy Thanksgiving. I'm sorry you'll have to speak up a little. There's a bit of an echo in here. I'm just getting settled in my new place." My quiet, reasonable tone seemed to infuriate her even more. "Your new place," she shrieked. "What are you talking about, Dad? What have you done?" "I've simply moved on, my dear," I said, my voice as gentle as a summer breeze. "Just as you and Rick were so keen for me to do. You were right. The old house was becoming far too much for me. I needed a simpler life. You helped me see that. I should be thanking you." "Stop it," she cried. "Stop playing these games. What is going on?" "The developer. The sale. Our plan." "Ah, yes. Your plan." I said, a hint of cheerful nostalgia in my voice. I did feel it was a little incomplete. It seemed to have overlooked a few key historical facts, so I took the liberty of finishing it for you, of writing the final chapter. In fact, I said, my voice now full of a bright, benevolent warmth, I even left you and Rick a little Thanksgiving gift, a sort of inheritance, you might say. It should clear up any confusion you might be having. There was a sudden sharp silence on her end. The rage was momentarily replaced by a confused, wary curiosity. "A gift?" she asked, her voice a suspicious whisper. "What gift? Where?" This was the moment. The final move of the game. I was not just telling her to open a drawer. I was telling her to walk into the courtroom, step into the defendant's box, and read her own verdict. "Go into my study," I said, my voice simple and clear. "The old oak desk. The top drawer on the right-hand side. It's unlocked. You'll find everything you need to know in there. All your questions will be answered." "The drawer?" she repeated, baffled. "What's in the drawer?" "Your future, my dear," I said softly. "The future you and Rick have worked so hard to build for yourselves. It's all in there. Go and see." I heard a muffled exchange in the background. It was Rick's voice, sharp and urgent. "What is it? What did he say?" I heard Chloe repeat my instructions, her voice a mixture of confusion and a dawning terrible dread. "I have to go now," I said, my voice still pleasant. "So much unpacking to do. You two have a wonderful rest of your Thanksgiving." "Dad, wait!" she almost screamed into the phone. But I did not wait. I hung up. I ended the call, severing the last connection I had to the woman who had once been my daughter. I sat there in the profound, echoing silence of my new, empty apartment. The trap was set. The final piece of evidence was about to be presented, not by me, not by a lawyer, but by the defendants themselves. I had done my part. The rest was simply history, a final, unavoidable chapter of cause and effect, and it was about to be written. All that was left to do was listen for the scream. I hung up the phone. The quiet in my new empty apartment was absolute, but I was not there. In my mind's eye, I was back in my old home, a silent, invisible observer in the dining room, watching the fallout of my quiet little bombshell. I could see the scene as if it were a memory. The stunned faces of my family, the look of pure, uncomprehending rage on my daughter's face. The way Rick's confident smirk had frozen, then crumbled into a mask of baffled fury. I had not just interrupted their announcement, I had detonated their reality. And then I had delivered the final instruction, the final quiet move of the game. Go into my study, the top drawer on the right. I had sent them on a treasure hunt, but the treasure at the end was their own ruin. I could picture their frantic, hurried movements. They would have pushed back from the table, their chairs scraping loudly on the hardwood floor. They would have ignored the confused questions from my brother and sister-in-law. "Chloe, what's going on? What new owners?" They would have moved as one, a single entity driven by a desperate, panicked need for answers, for a denial of the impossible truth I had just presented. They would burst into my study, the room that had been my sanctuary, now the stage for their final judgment. The room would be quiet dark, save for the ambient light from the dining room spilling through the doorway. It would smell of old books and lemon polish, a scent from a life they had just tried to obliterate. Chloe, her hands trembling with a mixture of rage and a dawning terrible fear, would be the one to approach the desk. The old heavy oak desk where I had signed her report cards, where I had helped her with her homework, where I had written the checks for her college education. It was a piece of furniture that had been a silent witness to my entire life as her father. She would reach for the small brass handle of the top drawer on the right. Her hesitation would be brief, a final flickering moment of denial before confronting the truth. She would pull. The sound of the old wood sliding open would be unnaturally loud in the silent waiting house, and there inside it would not be what she expected. There were no stacks of cash, no cashier's check, no angry letter. There was only a strange, almost insulting collection of 3 simple things laid out neatly on the felt lining of the drawer. The first thing she would see right on top would be the most confusing. A single cheap-looking brass key attached to a plain plastic fob, and beside it a small folded piece of my personal stationery. Rick, impatient and angry, would be peering over her shoulder. "What is that?" he would snarl. "A key. Is he senile? Is this some kind of sick joke?" Chloe's trembling fingers would unfold the note. I knew the words by heart. I could hear her whispering them aloud, her voice a reedy, uncertain thread. "This is your new inheritance. Start building." The words would mean nothing to them. Inheritance building. It was the nonsensical rambling of an old man. Their confusion would curdle into a deeper, more frustrated anger. "He's lost his mind," Rick would spit. "This is insane. Where is the real stuff? The real papers?" And then his eyes would fall on the next item in the drawer, lying just beneath where the note had been. It would be a single sheet of paper protected in a clear plastic sleeve. It would have the official, imposing letterhead of the Cook County District Attorney's Office. Rick, the ambitious man of business, the man who flirted with the edges of the law, would recognize the look of an official legal document instantly. His anger would falter, replaced by a sudden cold spike of fear. He would snatch it from the drawer. He would read the words at the top. Felony Investigation Unit. He would see the case number, and then he would see their names typed in the cold, unforgiving font of bureaucracy. Thompson Rick, Coleman Chloe. And beside their names, the charge, the legal term for the crime he had so arrogantly committed just a few days earlier, forgery Class 1 felony. The color would drain from his face. The confident, sneering man who had condescendingly offered to organize my life would vanish, replaced by a pale, sweating common criminal who had just been handed a copy of his own indictment. This was not a family squabble anymore. This was not a game. This was a felony. This was prison time. Chloe, seeing the look on his face, would read the document over his shoulder. The words would swim before her eyes. Felony. Investigation. Her own name. The floor, the solid, dependable foundation of her entire world would simply drop away. The vague, distant threat of consequences had just become a clear, present, and inescapable reality. They were not just in danger of losing the house, they were in danger of losing their freedom. And then at the very bottom of the drawer they would see the final item, the thickest, most substantial document of all. It was the one thing they had been searching for, the key to their entire plan, the deed to the house. But as Chloe's numb, nerveless fingers would pull it from the drawer, she would see that something was terribly wrong. This was not a dusty old paper from a safe deposit box. This was a fresh, crisp, professionally bound closing document. She would flip to the signature page. She would see my name, my real authentic signature, on the line marked seller, and on the line marked buyer, she would see two names she did not recognize, David and Sarah Peterson. And beside the signatures, the embossed official notary seal and the date, Monday, November 24th, 2 days ago. This was the final killing blow. The coup de grace. This was the irrefutable, legally binding proof that their entire plan, their entire Thanksgiving performance, their entire future had been a fantasy. The house was gone. The prize was gone. The money was gone. Their crime was discovered. And their loving, senile, and utterly underestimated father had been the architect of it all. He had not been a victim. He had been the executioner. I can picture the scene with a historian's clarity. Rick would stand there catatonic, the criminal complaint trembling in his hand, his mind a black hole of canceled calculations and future prison sentences. And Chloe, my daughter, would look from the sales contract to the felony charge to the pathetic, insulting key to a life she could not possibly imagine living. The full, monstrous, and inescapable scope of my counterplan would finally, completely, and catastrophically dawn on her. The sound would begin in the back of her throat, a low, animal whimper of pure, absolute disbelief. It would build a rising wave of horror, of loss, of a humiliation so profound it was a physical agony, and then it would erupt. A raw, piercing, soul-shattering scream of a woman who had just realized that her life, her entire, beautiful, perfect, and utterly fraudulent life, was over. The play was over, the verdict had been read, and the audience, the stunned, silent family in the dining room, was now rushing in to view the final tragic tableau. Chloe's scream was not a sound of surprise or anger. It was a sound from a deeper, more primal place. It was the sound of a soul being torn in two, the sound of a life ending. It echoed through the quiet, stately rooms of my old house, a raw, jagged tear in the fabric of the perfect Thanksgiving. I could picture the scene in the dining room with a historian's clarity. The stunned silence, the dropped forks, the wide, frightened eyes. My family, who had been suspended in a state of confused disbelief since my phone call, would be jolted into action by that single terrifying sound. My brother Robert, a man of action, would have been the first to move his chair, scraping back violently. "What in God's name was that?" he would have shouted, his voice a panicked roar. They would have rushed from the dining room, a confused and frightened herd, drawn by the sound of the final collapse. They would pour into my study, expecting to find what? An accident. A sudden illness. They would not have been prepared for what they found. The scene that greeted them would have been a tableau of utter ruin. They would see my daughter Chloe, the beautiful, confident star of the evening, collapsed on the floor, weeping with a guttural, animalistic grief. They would see her husband Rick, the charming, successful man of business, standing as still and as pale as a marble statue, his eyes wide and vacant, staring at a wall that only he could see. And in the center of it all, the source of the chaos, the open drawer of my desk, its contents a strange and damning collection of papers. "Chloe, honey, what is it?" my sister-in-law. May would cry, rushing to my daughter's side, trying to comfort a grief whose source she could not possibly comprehend. "Rick's son, talk to us. What happened? What did Julian say?" But they would get no answers. Chloe was incoherent, lost in a storm of her own making. Rick was a ghost. His mind already departed for the cold, lonely prison cell of his own future. And so, my brother Robert, a practical man, a man who believed in facts, would have done the only logical thing. He would have looked for the cause. He would have walked to my desk and looked into the open drawer. He would have seen the strange assortment, the key, the note, the official-looking documents. He would have picked up the thickest one first, the sales contract. He would have flipped through it, his brow furrowed in confusion. "Julian sold the house," he would have muttered to himself, baffled, "to a family named Peterson." And then he would have seen the other document, the one in the plastic sleeve, the one with the official letterhead of the district attorney's office. His eyes would have scanned the page, and I can picture the exact moment his confusion would have turned to a dawning, sickening horror. He would have seen his niece's name, he would have seen the name of her husband, and he would have seen the two words that explained everything: felony forgery. The room would have fallen silent as the family watched him, waiting for an explanation. He would have looked up from the papers, his face pale, his expression one of utter, heartbroken disbelief. He would have looked at his weeping niece on the floor, at her catatonic husband, and then at the stunned faces of his own family. "My God," he would have whispered, his voice a hoarse, broken thing. Julian sold the house because they had already tried to sell it themselves. They forged his name. The truth, stark, ugly, and undeniable, would descend upon the room. The last pieces of the puzzle would click into place. My strange phone call, my daughter's scream, it all made a terrible, tragic sense now. The coup had failed, the plotters were exposed, and the loyal subjects who had been so easily swayed by their performance were now staring at the irrefutable proof of their treason. The feast was over, the performance was done. And what was left was a family finally, for the first time that day, being forced to confront the truth. It was the most honest and the most terrible Thanksgiving we had ever had. The weeks after Thanksgiving were a strange kind of silent autumn. I had moved into my new apartment, a small, clean space with large windows overlooking a quiet, tree-lined street. My books were unpacked, my photographs were on the walls, and the ghost of Vivian's memory had settled comfortably into the new rooms. I had expected to feel a profound sense of loss, of dislocation. Instead, for the first time in years, I felt a quiet, unshakable peace. I had amputated a diseased limb, and while the phantom pains were real, I knew with a deep and certain clarity that I had saved the whole. I did not seek out news of Chloe and Rick. I did not need to. The news in the form of my old friend Charlie came to me. He came over about 2 weeks into December, a dusting of the first real snow on the shoulders of his overcoat. I made us coffee, and we sat in my new comfortable armchairs, the chaos of that Thanksgiving dinner feeling like a scene from a history book, a distant, violent chapter that was now thankfully in the past. "Well," he began after a long, comfortable silence, "the ripples from your little earthquake are turning into a tidal wave." I just nodded, waiting for him to continue. "I had lunch with your brother Robert yesterday," he said. "He told me what happened after you left. I had not spoken to any of my family since that night. I had sent a simple, polite email explaining that I needed time and space, and they had thankfully respected it." "It was ugly, Julian," Charlie said, his voice low. "Just as you predicted. After the initial shock of your announcement and after Chloe's episode, Robert went into your study. He read the documents in the drawer, the sales contract, the police report. He saw it all, and he was the one who had to explain it to the rest of the family." "How did they take it?" I asked, my voice quiet. "Like a death in the family," he said grimly. "They were heartbroken. But more than that, they were furious. Furious at Chloe and Rick for the betrayal, for the lies, for trying to manipulate them all. Robert said that when Chloe and Rick finally came out of the study, trying to spin some story about you being confused, about it all being a misunderstanding, no one would listen. Robert just looked at them and told them to get out of your house. Your sister-in-law, May, who has always adored Chloe, apparently told her she was a disgrace to her mother's memory. They were cast out, Julian. Completely and utterly ostracized. No one is taking their calls. In the eyes of the family, they no longer exist." I felt a pang of a deep ancient sorrow, the father in me mourning the loss of his child, not to death, but to a moral void. But I said nothing. It was a necessary casualty of the war they had started. That's the social fallout, Charlie continued, taking a sip of his coffee. The financial fallout is just as brutal. The developer Northside Redevelopment is not an organization that takes kindly to being made a fool of. The moment they found out that the sales agreement Rick had filed was based on a forged signature, they came down on him with the fire of 1,000 suns. They have filed a multi-million-dollar lawsuit against him for fraud and punitive damages. They had already spent a significant amount of money on surveyors, architects, and legal fees, all based on his fraudulent document. They are going to make an example of him. They will strip him of every asset he has, and then they will hound him in bankruptcy court for the rest of his life. I thought of Rick, of his smug confidence, his belief that he was a player in the big leagues. He had tried to swim with sharks, and now they were devouring him. It was a predictable, if ugly, outcome. And that, Charlie said, his voice dropping even lower, brings us to the legal fallout, the criminal part. He looked at me, his expression now deadly serious. The DA's office has been moving quietly but quickly. My contact, Maria Flores, has been building her case. With the evidence we provided, it was an easy task. They subpoenaed Rick's bank records. They subpoenaed the developer's records. They got sworn affidavits from the family members who were present at the dinner. They have constructed an airtight, irrefutable case. He leaned forward, his voice a low final whisper. Last Tuesday, a grand jury was convened in secret. They returned an indictment in less than an hour. Warrants for the arrest of both Rick Thompson and Chloe Coleman were issued yesterday. Even though I had known this was coming, the words were still a blow. Warrants. Arrest. My daughter. They haven't been arrested yet, Charlie said, seeing the look on my face. Flores is taking her time. She's letting them twist in the wind. She knows they're not a flight risk. Their passports have been flagged, their bank accounts are frozen. They are trapped. She'll likely have them picked up after the holidays. She's not a monster. But the train is coming, Julian, and there is nothing in the world that can stop it now. We sat in silence, the full, terrible scope of the consequences laid bare between us. Social ruin, financial ruin, and now criminal ruin. The beautiful, perfect life they had been so proud of had been dismantled piece by piece until nothing was left but a pile of ashes and a future of court dates and prison sentences. I had not done this out of a desire for revenge. I had done this because it was the right thing to do. I had done it for Vivian, for our friends, for the integrity of our name. But sitting there, in the quiet of my new peaceful life, I could feel no sense of victory. Only the grim, somber satisfaction of a historian who has seen the arc of history, however painful, bend inexorably towards justice. I had simply presented the facts. History and the law were now doing the rest. The weeks turned into a month, then 2. The brilliant colors of autumn faded into the stark, quiet gray of a Chicago winter. I settled into the peaceful rhythm of my new life. My small apartment was a fortress of solitude and quiet contemplation. The days were filled with books, with long walks by the frozen lakefront, and with the slow, methodical work of reviewing the applications for the scholarship fund. The chaos of that Thanksgiving, the ugly, violent rupture of my family felt like a scene from a distant war, a historical event I had studied rather than lived through. The legal process, I knew, was grinding forward in its own slow, inexorable way. I did not follow it closely. I had given my testimony to the grand jury, a simple factual recitation of events, and had then retreated back into my quiet life. Charlie, however, was my link to that other world. He would call me every few weeks with an update, a brief professional report from the front lines. He came over on a particularly cold afternoon in January, a thick file folder tucked under his arm. We sat in my study, a pot of hot tea steaming between us. "The discovery phase is complete," he said without preamble. "Both sides have shown their hands, and it's exactly what we predicted, Julian, only uglier." "They're turning on each other," I stated. It was not a question. "Turning on each other doesn't even begin to describe it," he said, a look of grim fascination on his face. "They are engaged in a campaign of mutual scorched earth destruction. In 40 years of practicing law, I have never seen two co-defendants so eagerly and so completely attempt to annihilate one another." He opened the folder and slid a document across the table. It was a summary of Rick's official testimony to the prosecutors. Rick's strategy is to play the victim, Charlie explained. He is painting himself as a brilliant but naive real estate prodigy who was led astray, a loving husband who was emotionally manipulated by a greedy, ambitious wife with insatiable tastes. I read the summary. The lies were breathtaking in their scope and audacity. He's claiming that Chloe was the true mastermind, Charlie continued, providing the color commentary. He's telling the prosecutors that she was the one who targeted my friends using her intimate knowledge of their lives to identify them as easy marks. He's claiming that she was the one who was obsessed with the status of living in that house, that she was the one who came up with the idea to have me declared incompetent. He's even trying to claim that she was the one who suggested forging my signature, telling him, "Don't worry, he's my father, he'll forgive me eventually." He's twisting every conversation, every shared moment into a weapon against her. It was a masterful, if monstrous, work of fiction. He was taking their shared crimes and laying them all at her feet, recasting himself as a man who had only broken the law out of a desperate, misguided love for his wife. "And Chloe?" I asked, my voice quiet. Charlie slid another document across the table. Chloe, on the other hand, is playing the role of a lifetime. Her defense is a potent cocktail of battered wife syndrome and complete financial ignorance. I read her statement, and a profound, weary sadness washed over me. "She's claiming she knew nothing," Charlie said, his voice dripping with cynicism. "She's portraying herself as a trusting, sheltered woman who never questioned her brilliant husband's business. Yeah. She's telling them he was controlling, verbally abusive, that he handled all the finances, and she was just a trophy wife who was kept in the dark, too terrified to question the source of their endless river of money." "No one will believe that," I said. "The spending, the lifestyle—" "Oh, it gets better," Charlie said, a grim smile on his face. "She's using your own actions against you. She's using the final gift you left in the drawer as her primary piece of evidence. Her lawyers are arguing that the key and the note were your way of acknowledging her victimhood, your way of giving your trapped daughter an escape route from her monstrous criminal husband. She is trying to twist your final act of judgment into a character reference, a proof of her own innocence." I leaned back in my chair, the sheer serpentine logic of their mutual betrayals making my head spin. They had once been partners in a shared lie. Now they were the authors of two separate competing fictions, each designed to send the other to prison. "They think they're saving themselves," Charlie said, as if reading my thoughts. "But they're fools. They are both of them the prosecution's star witness. They are so eager to incriminate each other that they are happily, voluntarily filling in all the blanks of the case for the DA. He provides the motive, her insatiable greed. She provides the confirmation of the lavish lifestyle that greed paid for. He gives them the how and the what. She gives them the why. Together," he said, tapping the two files on the table, "they are providing a perfect, detailed, and corroborated confession of their entire criminal partnership, all while trying to stab each other in the back. Any chance of a united defense, any chance of generating even a shred of sympathy from a jury is gone. They have destroyed each other's credibility so completely that the only thing left for a jury to believe is that they are both, in their own unique and monstrous ways, equally guilty." Their love had been a business deal, a merger based on a shared prospectus of greed. And now, with the company facing a hostile takeover by the federal government, they were each trying to sell off the other's assets in a desperate attempt to cover their own losses. "So," I said, "what happens now?" "Now," Charlie said, closing the folder with a sound of finality, "the prosecutors will offer them both a terrible plea deal, a few years less than the maximum sentence in exchange for avoiding a messy public trial. Faced with the certainty of the other's testimony, they will both eventually take the deal. They will go to prison, Julian, for a long time. Their mutual betrayal has guaranteed their mutual destruction. They have authored their own sentences." I looked out the window at the snow falling, each flake unique, each one falling silently, inexorably to the cold, hard ground. I had only held up a mirror. The monsters they saw in it were their own. I had only provided the stage. The ugly final act of their play they had written entirely by themselves. A year has passed. The wheel of the seasons has turned, bringing another November, another Thanksgiving. But the world, my world, is a different place. I am not in the large, hollow house that holds the ghosts of my past. I am in a small, bright apartment on the north side of the city, a place with large windows that look out over the tireless, beautiful expanse of Lake Michigan. My books are on the shelves, my photographs are on the walls, and the quiet here is not the quiet of loneliness, but the quiet of peace. The air in my new home is not thick with the tension of a coming coup, but with the warm, honest aromas of a simple, genuine feast. A smaller turkey roasts in the oven. A single pecan pie made from Vivian's recipe cools on the counter. The table, a small round oak table that is just the right size, is set for 4. My guests arrive not with the false smiles of conspirators, but with the true, unburdened joy of friends. Charlie comes in first, a good bottle of bourbon in his hand and a familiar, comfortable grin on his face. "Smells a damn sight better in here than it did last year," he says, and we both share a quiet, understanding laugh. My other guests arrive a few minutes later. It is David and Sarah, the young couple who are now the stewards of my old home. Sarah's arms are no longer cradling her belly. They are now cradling a small sleeping bundle wrapped in a soft blue blanket. Their son Daniel, born in the spring in the house Vivian and I had built. They fill my small apartment with a new and beautiful kind of energy, the energy of a young family just beginning their story. They tell me about the house, about the small changes they've made, about how the morning sun fills the kitchen. "Daniel loves the backyard," Sarah says, her voice full of a mother's quiet joy. "We put a blanket for him under the big oak tree. He just lies there and stares up at the leaves for hours. He never cries. It's his favorite place in the world." The words are a gift, a quiet, profound confirmation that I had made the right choice. Vivian's tree, Chloe's tree, was now Daniel's tree. The legacy was not broken. It had not been demolished. It had simply been passed on, transferred to hands that understood its worth. We sit down at the small table, a strange and wonderful new family. Charlie, the guardian of my past. David and Sarah and their son, the stewards of my history. And me, a man finally at peace in his present. The conversation is easy, full of laughter and stories. They tell me about David's students at the high school, about the challenges and triumphs of new parenthood. I tell them about the first recipients of the scholarship, about the brilliant young minds who are now building their own futures. There is no mention of Chloe or Rick. Their names are ghosts that do not belong at this table. I know through Charlie that their story reached its predictable, ugly conclusion. Faced with the mountain of evidence and each other's vicious testimony, they had both taken plea deals. Rick was serving a 7-year sentence in a federal prison. Chloe, thanks to a marginally better lawyer and the lingering ghost of her family's name, was serving a 4-year sentence. Their divorce had been finalized while they were both still in custody. Their beautiful, fraudulent life was a pile of ashes, a forgotten headline in the city's long and complicated history. I do not know if they will ever learn their lesson. I have stopped trying to guess. Their story is no longer my own. As we finish our meal, David raises his glass of cider. "I'd like to make a toast," he says, his voice full of a sincere, earnest emotion. "To Julian. For your kindness, for your generosity, for giving our family a home. We know the history of that house, and we want you to know that we will spend our lives trying to honor it." I look at their faces, young and full of hope. I look at the sleeping baby, a symbol of all the new beginnings the world has to offer. I look at my old friend Charlie, his face a testament to a lifetime of unwavering loyalty. And I feel not the ache of what I have lost, but the profound, overwhelming gratitude for what I have found. "The honor is all mine," I say, and my voice is steady and clear. "Welcome home." The ghosts are quiet now. The past is at peace. The legacy, the true legacy, is safe. And for the first time in a long, long time, I am truly and deeply thankful. The sounds of happy, easy laughter have faded, leaving a warm and pleasant echo in the quiet of my apartment. Charlie has gone home. David and Sarah have taken their sleeping son back to theirs, my home. It still feels strange to think of it that way, but it is a good kind of strange. It is a rightness. I stand by the window looking out at the endless dark expanse of Lake Michigan, the distant lights of the city scattered along the shore like a fallen constellation. For so many years I believed my life, my history was contained within the 4 walls of that house on the quiet tree-lined street. I thought my legacy was something physical, something I could touch. The oak tree, the pencil marks on the wall, the worn spot on the floor where my wife stood. I thought that to lose the house was to lose all of that, to lose her, to lose myself. My daughter and her husband taught me a terrible and valuable lesson. They showed me that they saw the house in the same way I had, but with a horrifying difference. They did not see it as a sacred vessel of memory. They saw it as a commodity, an asset, a pile of bricks and wood and land that could be liquidated for a profit. They saw my history as their inheritance, and they believed that inheritance was a thing to be sold. And in their greed, they forced me to make a choice between the building and the values it was built upon, a choice between the physical shell of my past and the living soul of my integrity. I had to let go of the home to save what had truly made it a home in the first place. I had to sell the house to protect its history. And now I see. My legacy was never the house itself. My legacy is the young family raising their son under the branches of Vivian's oak tree. My legacy is the scholarship students who are building their own futures on a foundation of integrity. It is the quiet respect of an old friend and the simple, peaceful dignity of a life lived honestly. That is the inheritance that truly matters. For years I believed a parent's legacy was the home they left behind. I thought my history was contained within four walls. But my children taught me a painful lesson. A house is just a building, and it can be sold. True legacy is the respect you command and the integrity you uphold. I had to let go of the house my wife and I built to save the values we built it upon. A foundation of character is the only inheritance that can never be taken away, never be forged, and never be sold. What do you think of the choice I made? Is a home more than just a building? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story moved you, please show your support by liking this video and subscribing to the channel. Thank you for being here with me.